Chapter 586. Come to think of it, it had been a long time since the dictum of death had appeared. The owner of it would definitely not be a simple character. The fact that he had to use the dictum due to certain incidents had already proven that the consequences of the dictum of death's reappearance would not be easy. The participants who were involved due to the dictum of death would not be able to reap any benefits easily. Before the owner of the dictum of death could say anything further, the assassins in the meeting had already been dealt a heavy blow. The dark clouds and the frightening aura were not something that an ordinary person could bear. Therefore, it was better for them to observe for a few days before deciding what to do next. Yunyang did not make any moves in the following period of time. Firstly, the matter that he had wanted to instigate previously was no longer an opportunity due to the sudden change in the situation. It would be useless to act rashly. Secondly, the conflict between the Four Seasons Tower and the assassins did not erupt due to this incident. Thirdly, which was also the most fundamental reason, the assassins that Yunyang had hoped to see the most had yet to arrive. Ouyang Shaoxi, for example. Yunyang had been thinking about the strange red light on Jilingxi for the past few days. He had been thinking about the attack from the man in black, the disintegration in the air, and the hidden power of the red light. Yunyang was now certain that the man in black must be dead. He had exploded and died. He could not have been more dead. Moreover, he did not hold back in his attack at all. All the force had been directed at Jilingxi. Then, there was the red light. It was the red light that had blocked the attack. Yunyang had even boldly come up with a terrifying conjecture. Not only had the red light stopped the man in black's attack, it had even retaliated. The man in black had been sent flying at a speed that was far beyond Yunyang's knowledge. It was not his own ability, but he had been sent flying by the force of the red light. When he landed, he had disintegrated instantly. Yes, he had been killed. When Yunyang first thought of this, he wanted to overturn his conjecture almost immediately. It did not make sense. It did not make sense at all. He was well aware of Jilingxi's cultivation base. Her own cultivation base was much weaker than his. How could she have the ability to send the man in black flying and even kill him from the recoil? However, after thinking about it again and again, this situation seemed to be the only suitable explanation for the current situation. There was only one possibility left: although the red light was incredibly powerful, it did not originate from Jilingxi's cultivation base. It would only be effective when Jilingxi's safety was threatened. Thinking of this, Yunyang broke out in a cold sweat. He recalled how he had been flung away the other day and thought about what had happened to the man in black. Had he almost followed in the man's footsteps that day? No, according to the time, it should be said that he was the one who helped the black-clothed man fight the Yellow Springs. As Yunyang calmed his thoughts and steadied himself, he began to wonder what the red light was and how it could possess such terrifying power. Yunyang could not figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. The only thing he knew was that Jilingxi's identity was probably very, very special. As the person directly involved, Jilingxi did not even know about the existence of the red glow. The red light must have been cast by an unparalleled expert whose level Yunyang could not fathom at his current stage. It was set up specifically to protect her. It might not appear normally, but when there was a threat to her reputation or her life, the red light would appear automatically. Up until now, the red light had appeared twice. The first time was when Yunyang and Jilingxi had accidentally touched each other on the same bed, and then the red light had appeared. This time, the strength of the man in black had reached a level that could threaten Jilingxi's life. Therefore, the man in black had met with a tragedy. It was not difficult to imagine how much the person who had cast the restriction on Jilingxi to protect her cared about her. Yunyang wiped the sweat off his forehead and sucked in a breath. He could not help recalling Jilingxi's confession and sighed, "Girl. Even if you like me, I like you too. Both of us can only treat each other with respect for a very long time. it had to be said that Yun Yang had never thought about it before and his thoughts were never on it. Now that Ji Lingxi had abruptly entered his heart skipped a beat and he could not help thinking about his marriage. However, it seemed that he was not as ignorant as he used to be. If he could not control himself now, perhaps he would be severely injured? Hurt his tendons and bones? Shattered body and bones? Obliterated soul and spirit? The person who cast this restriction in Ji Lingxi's body. Could it be her biological father? Yun Yang chuckled dryly. This old man is really cautious. Thinking of this, Yun Yang felt as if he had thought of something. He stood up abruptly, his entire body stiffening. His gaze regained clarity. After a long, long time, he suddenly cried out, "Is it? Is it?" Yun Yang could only feel his heart pounding so hard that it almost jumped out of his mouth. An even more shocking thought popped into his mind. If this red light was left by Ji Lingxi's elder, then Ji Lingxi and eighth brother are biological siblings. There's no doubt about it. If that's the case, wouldn't the person who left it only care about his daughter and not his son? Wait, if it wasn't for the person who cared about his daughter and not his son, wouldn't eighth brother still be alive? Eighth brother was actually rescued? Is it correct to think of it this way? Yun Yang felt his mouth go dry, the inexplicable joy in his heart almost bursting out of his chest. What's more, maybe it wasn't just eighth brother himself, but the other brothers were rescued as well. If this is the case, Sister Yun Zuyu's sudden disappearance that day, before she disappeared, she fed me so much good stuff. Although so many good things have been assimilated into my body, I can only unleash 100th or 20% of its power now. Those are all rare spiritual ingredients, it's already rare to find even a little bit of it. Where did she get so many good things? However, if it's given by some reclusive expert, it makes sense instead. If that's the case, does it mean that Sister Yu isn't dead as well? They were all rescued by the reclusive expert. Sister Yu's disappearance was actually only because she was fifth brother's wife, that's why she was taken away. The more Yun Yang thought, the more agitated he became. The more he thought, the more chaotic his mind became, but at the same time, it was filled with a thick sense of hope. He realized that all these incidents seemed to be connected by a single thread, deducing in the direction that he was most willing to see. If this is really the case, if eighth brother didn't die at all, then Sister Lan's last letter, saying that she was very happy to be with eighth brother, would be the truth and the reality. Sister Lan didn't die for love? She was just taken away by eighth brother? Yun Yang panted heavily, feeling a rush of blood to the top of his head. At that moment, he actually felt a little dizzy. Then, he sprung up and dashed out, rushing to Ji Lingxi's room. It was already midnight. Ever since Ji Lingxi had confessed her love to Yun Yang that day when she thought she was dead, she had been too embarrassed to step out of her room for the past 2 days. No matter how much the young lady loved someone, she still had a sense of shame in her heart. Of course, Yun Yang knew what was bothering the little girl, so he would not disturb her abruptly, lest she felt even more awkward. However, Yun Yang could not care less now. This matter concerned the safety and whereabouts of his brothers and sister-in-law, he had to get to the bottom of it. The little girl was the only clue at the moment, there was no room for hesitation. Bang, 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 a series of knocks came from the door. Ji Lingxi was already asleep, her face flushed as she lay under the blanket. Her thoughts were unknown, her eyelids fluttering restlessly. Suddenly, she heard the knocking that sounded like a drum. She sat up immediately and asked, "Who is it?" "It's me." Yun Yang's hurried voice came from outside. "Lingxi, open the door quickly. I have something very important to tell you." Ji Lingxi's heart skipped a beat as she stammered, You, what's the matter?" "It's already very late," the little girl thought subconsciously. Could it be that he knows my feelings and has accepted them? That's why he's coming tonight. No, no. Absolutely not. Ji Lingxi felt her entire body burning up as she rejected him repeatedly. Yunyang said, "Open the door, open the door. I must see you tonight. Let's have a good talk. It's really serious. Have a good talk, serious." Ji Lingxi was even more flustered. What could it be that a man and a woman had to have a good talk in the middle of the night? How could serious matters be discussed at this time? They were both at the age of youth. Who did he take for a fool? No, no, no. I won't open the door even if I die. Ji Lingxi was flustered, her voice almost sounding like she was about to cry. Please. Yunyang, go back first. It's very late. Let's talk tomorrow morning. It's not convenient tomorrow morning. Yunyang said anxiously, this has to be carried out tonight, Ji Lingxi murmured shyly, her head almost burying itself into the blanket. How shameful. What a foe. How could he even open his mouth? You wanted to look for me just now, yet you didn't even try to avoid it. You knocked so loudly on the door and moaned so loudly. How could I have the nerve to open the door for you now? If you had been quieter just now, more discreet. I might have opened the door. What an idiot. Chapter 587. Open the door quickly. I really have something urgent. I feel that, your brother doesn't seem to be dead. Yunyang lowered his voice, but his tone was unprecedentedly firm. Sensing Ji Lingxi's hesitation, he understood immediately and explained himself quickly. His words, however, were earth-shattering. What? Ji Lingxi was stunned, her first thought of disbelief. However, how could she not know that Yunyang would never joke about such matters? She was inexplicably surprised. Without hesitation, she dashed to the door and pulled it open. Her face was pale as she asked in a trembling voice, "What did you say? What did you say just now?" Yunyang closed the door as soon as he stepped in and said, "It's a long story. There are many twists and turns. I need to verify something with you before I can make a conclusion." Ji Lingxi took a few steps back and was about to question him further when she realized that she had only worn her underwear when she had rushed to open the door in her haste. She blushed and quickly pulled her cloak over to cover herself up. Leaning against the bed, she said, "Just tell me what you've discovered. What do you want to verify? I'll do my best to cooperate." Her worry for her brother had overshadowed her shyness. If her brother could be safe, what was the point of being embarrassed? Yunyang thought about it and asked in a low voice, "Lingxi, you and Ji Lingfeng, my eighth brother, are really siblings born from the same mother. There's no discrepancy in this, is there?" Ji Lingxi was slightly annoyed. "What do you mean by this? Of course we're biological siblings. How can this be false?" Yunyang blushed, feeling slightly awkward, but he persisted in asking, "This is the key question. What I mean is, where are your biological parents now? Do you know about this?" Ji Lingxi's gaze dimmed as she said, "How would I know? Ever since I started to remember certain things, my brother and I have always been orphans." Yunyang's expression froze as he asked in surprise, "Then how can you be so sure that you're really biological siblings? This is very important. It must be verified." Ji Lingxi said angrily, "What do you mean? Of course we're biological siblings. What's there to doubt about? Are you crazy? Why do you keep asking these annoying questions?" Yunyang smiled, looking much more relaxed as he said, "As long as you're certain, then eighth brother will be fine. He's still alive and kicking." Yunyang, what's wrong with you today? Why are your words so confusing and incoherent? Do you know what you're talking about? Why am I getting more and more confused?" Yunyang's face was filled with delight as he chuckled, "You don't know what's so special about you. When the men in black attacked earlier, it was all because of your divine light that we managed to escape death. Since you have such a powerful divine light hidden within you, your parents can't be ordinary people. Since they could protect you so well, how could something have happened to your biological brother? So, my eighth brother is definitely not dead. He must still be alive. Yun-yang was inexplicably excited as he spoke. Mystical? Red protective light? Escape death? Ji Lingxi frowned and looked at him suspiciously. Explain in more detail. I'm still confused and don't understand. Yun-yang laughed and said, that's because you didn't pay attention to my main point. I'm saying that you have an extremely powerful and mysterious force within you. No one can truly hurt you. The day before, the demonic man's body and soul were annihilated. It was because of the backlash from your divine light. Ji Lingxi was still perplexed as she said, is this the main point you're talking about? Even if you repeat it twice, I still don't understand. What red light, protective light, what's all this about? I still don't understand a single thing. It means that no matter what danger you're in, there'll be a red light. Yun-yang explained in detail, so, eighth brother isn't dead. Ji Lingxi was even more confused. The more you say, the more confused I am. When did I have that red protective light? What does that thing have to do with my brother? What the hell are you talking about? Yun-yang was taken aback as well. You don't know? Yes, it looks like you really don't know. That makes sense. What light? How do I protect myself? Ji Lingxi looked at herself doubtfully and murmured, where's the light? Yun-yang could not help feeling anxious as well. It did not seem like it was easy to prove it. Suddenly recalling the day when he was flung away, he gritted his teeth and said, let's try it now. I think I should be able to trigger it. How? How? Ji Lingxi asked in surprise. Why don't you close your eyes first? Yun-yang was a little hesitant. Ji Lingxi's eyes widened in confusion as she said, what? What did you say? Suddenly, Yun-yang pounced on her and hugged her without any pretense. The moment she felt the heat from Yun-yang, Ji Lingxi was dumbfounded and struggled angrily. You really don't have any good intentions tonight, Yun-yang explained, I'm doing an experiment. I'm trying to trigger it. As he spoke, a pair of hands suddenly reached for Ji Lingxi's chest. Ji Lingxi yelped in shock, feeling dizzy as she watched Yun-yang's perverted hands grab the sacred spot on her chest and rub it. Then, he actually wanted to take off her clothes. Ji Lingxi was completely bewildered as she struggled instinctively. Yun-yang, don't, this. It was then that Ji Lingxi saw a faint red light emerge from her body. The moment the red light suddenly appeared, it expanded outwards without any warning. Ow! With a cry, Yun-yang was sent flying like a cannonball through the wall. He flew out like a kite with a broken string, crashing into the floral tree in the courtyard and bringing the tree along with him, slamming against the opposite wall with a loud thud. Although it was not entirely unexpected, it was still an unexpected turn of events. Yun-yang had no room to react to it, nor did he have the ability to react. In the end, both his arms and legs were pressed against the wall. He even paused for a moment, looking like a frog with its limbs spread wide open. Then, he slid down like a puddle of mud. Yun-yang spat out a mouthful of blood, his gaze unfocused as he murmured, "This is it, Yun-yang." Ji Lingxi cried out and dashed out quickly. Yun-yang lay on the bed while Ji Lingxi sat beside him with her head buried. There was a bitter smile on Yun-yang's face, his breath weak. It was obvious that his injuries were not light. Even if it was not fatal, he had suffered internal injuries. His internal organs were shaken and could not be healed in a short amount of time. In spite of this, he had paid a hefty price to confirm the existence of the red light, especially to let Ji Lingxi, the culprit, know that he was protected by the red light. This was a fact that no one in the world would believe if it was told. Although the price was a little high, it was worth it. The loss outweighed the gain. Yun Yang could confirm that the red light on Ji Lingxi would appear under at least two circumstances. The first involved her innocence while the second involved her life. In order to let Ji Lingxi see and confirm the existence of the mystical red light, Yun Yang had to be a rogue even if he had no other choice. I really don't understand. I know that it's risky to be a rogue, but why are there still so many rogues in this world? Yun Yang was melancholy. He dared to guarantee that if every rapist and hoodlum were to encounter the same situation as him every time they did something bad, there would be no such profession in this world. They would vanish forever. Yun Yang rubbed his fingers, as if he could still feel the smooth and gentle touch. He could not help sniffing it and murmured, "This feeling. It's pretty good. I've never touched something like this before, but it's so exciting just touching it. I'll find a chance to, Yun Yang. You're going to die." Ji Lingxi had just come in. Listening to Yun Yang's murmurs, she was embarrassed beyond words. She was here to take care of the patient, but in her confusion, she had kicked him out subconsciously. Ah! Yun Yang shrieked and fell to the ground, barely breathing. The incident had been verified. Thus, Yun Yang was relieved. How could such a mighty figure watch his son fall into the abyss of death and be consigned to eternal damnation? If his daughter had such a magical protection, how could his son not have one? Therefore, eighth brother was probably not dead. There was at least an 80% chance that he was still alive. Furthermore, not only was eighth brother not dead, his other brothers were most likely safe as well. This could also explain why fifth sister-in-law and eighth sister-in-law had disappeared so suddenly and in such a bizarre manner. With the intervention of such powerful beings, even if the disappearance was even more bizarre and inconceivable, it was still reasonable. However, the accountant, Ji Lingxi, was even more confused. Who am I? Who are my parents? What's with the red light on me? Ji Lingxi's body and mind were in an unprecedented state of confusion. At the same time, a deep resentment was growing bit by bit. Now that the truth was right before her eyes, she knew that she was indeed blessed with an unparalleled power. Her parents must have been almighty beings of this world, but all of them had such a powerful cultivation base. They were invincible existences in this world, able to kill a superb expert with a simple seal. Then why did all of you abandon your son and daughter? Why did you let us live under someone else's roof and grow up alone? I don't believe that all of you can't protect your children with such powerful abilities. I don't believe that all of you can't find us after setting up a seal. What I don't believe even more is that all of you are dead. Ji Lingxi bit her lower lip, her expression filled with stubbornness. This fact, was obvious. A seal could be triggered by an external force and could last for a long time, so the person who had cast the seal must still be alive. This was an indisputable fact. There was nothing to be said about it. If the person who had cast the seal on Ji Lingxi was already dead, the seal would have disappeared a long time ago. This was a well-known truth. However, if one was still alive and had such remarkable abilities, why did one have to watch his son and daughter struggle in this world? What kind of logic was that? Ji Lingxi believed the truth that her elder brother was not dead. However, she did not feel much joy at this piece of good news. She was engulfed in an indescribable emotion. Yun Yang was well aware of this emotion, but he was helpless and helpless. Even with Yun Yang's eloquence, he could not persuade her otherwise. He found it hard to speak. It was still the same day. I've come to Hangzhou this time to discuss the film adaptation of Supremacy. It's almost settled. Therefore, I'm very cautious. Brothers, if you have any thoughts, you can leave them in the book review and comment section. I really want Yun Yang to appear on the screen. There's another piece of good news. I heard that the World Conquering Films project has been restarted. I'm so excited that I've been drinking for the past 2 days and haven't written much. I'm sorry, but I'm really excited. There's one more thing, at the request of Hai Han Yi, I'm asking for a monthly vote on behalf of Zhou Zi's king. How long has it been since a Feng family disciple's monthly vote has been cast? Support the General League. Chapter 588. Ji Lingxi's disappointment lasted for a whole day before she slowly adjusted herself. The reason why she could maintain it for so long was because of what Yun Yang had said. Did it make a difference whether she had parents or not? That night, when Yun Yang had exposed her, Ji Lingxi was filled with sorrow and disappointment. No words of consolation could enter her ears. Furthermore, it was late at night. It was not convenient for Yun Yang to stay any longer, so he bade her farewell and left, wanting to leave the young lady alone to calm down. However, the next day, Ji Lingxi had no appetite for food or drink for the entire day. She looked haggard, looking at the two huge dark circles under her eyes. She probably did not sleep for the entire night as well. When it was time to light up the candles, Yun Yang brought her dinner personally, but Ji Lingxi was not hungry and did not want to eat. Yun Yang could not take it anymore, so he uttered those words. Ji Lingxi was stunned when she heard him. It was as if her heart had been struck, causing her to lay all her worries out on the table. For the first time, Yun Yang's usually calm expression showed signs of worry. He said slowly, "Lingxi, do you know? I'm an orphan too. King Yun Xiaoyao isn't my biological father. Just like you and eighth brother, I don't know who my biological parents are. This is my biggest regret in this lifetime, but as long as one is alive, one must live in the present. The days must go on. If they're still alive and they acknowledge me, I'll naturally be filial to them. However, if they're no longer here, I still have to live on. Actually, if you think things through and see through them, it's just that. It's a fact that I'm an orphan. Why blame the heavens and blame others? I didn't know who they were since I was young anyway. Isn't he still alive to this day? Strictly speaking, isn't your situation 100 times better than mine? After what happened yesterday, I can already confirm that your parents are still alive and they're the best of the best. Most importantly, they care about you unusually. They've set up a mystical seal on you that will activate the protection once you're in danger. Can't you see their sincerity? Is it really good to just keep complaining? Yun Yang recovered his usual smile and looked at Ji Lingxi warmly, saying softly, "Lingxi, do you know how envious I am of you after I confirm the existence of the protective red light on you? Or even jealousy? It's hatred." Yun Yang sucked in a soft breath and said with a smile, "My parents left nothing for me." Yun Yang walked out after he finished his words and did not say another word. Ji Lingxi was taken aback. If that was the case, then she was much, much more fortunate than Yun Yang. At least she still had her brother and the red protective light. As for him, he really had nothing. Yun Yang's back was still as straight as ever when he walked out, but Ji Lingxi could clearly feel that the straight back bore too much desolation. She could not help the pain in her heart. Impulsively, she called out, "Yun Yang." Yun Yang turned around and smiled quietly. Ji Lingxi leaned against the door frame and mustered her courage to say, "You're not lonely, you still have me." Yun Yang nodded and flashed a bright smile that was tinged with a hint of helplessness and self-mockery. He then turned to leave. Ji Lingxi was the most sensitive at the moment. She could sense the odd meaning behind Yun Yang's smile and could not help being taken aback. It took her a long while to figure it out. She could not help spitting and blushing, "This bastard." Yun Yang was obviously saying, "What's the use of having you? I can't touch you, I can't even touch you." They could only treat each other with respect. Another 3 to 4 days had passed. The weather had begun to warm up slightly, but the various forces in Tiantang City did not make much of a move. The so-called not much of a move was only relative. Although they looked like they were doing nothing, they were actually beginning to make some tentative moves. Coincidentally, at this time, a rumor rose without warning and swiftly spread throughout Tiantang City. Hey, did you know? The dark cloud that day was really scary. It was a demon that came to Tiantang City to wreak havoc, but it met young Master Yun unexpectedly and was killed with a single punch from young Master Yun. Young Master Yun? That young Master Yun? It's young Master Yun Yang, Yutong's unrivaled expert. Bullsh *T. What do you know? What the F***ck do you know? Don't spout nonsense. Yun Yang is a popinjay. None of his fame and achievements came easily. Have you forgotten his past popinjay reputation? The leader of Tiantang City's popinjays? How can someone like him be a master who can defeat demons? You're exaggerating. Do you know the whole story? Of course I know. I really don't know where did the young Master Yun you mentioned come from, tarnishing the grace of that rare elite for no reason. Let me tell you honestly, the peerless former who killed the demon that day was a mysterious assassin. That mysterious assassin saw the demon wreaking havoc on the world and appeared in the mortal realm. With just one move, that demon was completely destroyed. Assassin? You're saying that the expert that day was an assassin? He was an assassin, absolutely. How could there be such a formidable assassin? Besides, aren't assassins always murderers? The one who killed that day should have been an otherworldly expert who was compassionate and compassionate. Assassins are divided into different classes, alright? Some kill for money, some do it for justice, alright? Otherwise, why do you think the dictum of death existed that day, and why does it still have such a majestic presence today? That's true. Didn't the dictum of death reappear in the world previously? Did that unparalleled assassin come because of the dictum of death? Did he kill the demon by coincidence? Remember to keep it a secret. This is a big secret, how can an ordinary person know about it? Did you know that the demon in the dark cloud was killed by a mysterious assassin with a single strike? Why did I hear that it was young Master Yun who killed it? Pfft! How could that popinjay have such a skill? Why don't you think about it? That's true. That popinjay was a glutton in the past, how could he have such capability? I saw it with my own eyes that day. I was in a restaurant, facing that street. I saw the demon in the dark cloud suddenly descend with an earth-shattering aura, heading straight for the backyard of the residence of Yun, as though it was going to crush the residence of Yun. But at that moment, what? Tell me. Don't keep me guessing. Hee. On the street, there was a grey-robed old man with a hunched back, completely inconspicuous. Just as the dark cloud descended, the grey-robed old man suddenly raised his head. Wow. Wow, what? Was that old man in black or grey? What's with that look? Shut up, what are you interrupting for? It doesn't matter what he wore. What's important is that the moment the old man raised his head, the entire sky lit up. Those two gazes dispersed all the black clouds of demons in an instant. Wow. Then the old man said, since the dictum of death has appeared, how can demons be allowed to wreak havoc? Then he leaped up and a flash of sword light appeared, killing the demon in the sky. And then? Then, the grey-robed old man reverted to his ordinary look. If I hadn't looked closely, I wouldn't have noticed that this half-buried old man was actually such a divine figure. You saw it with your own eyes? I swear on the name of all 8 generations of my ancestors that if there's a single lie, may heaven and earth destroy me. Amazing, truly amazing. That's right, what kind of clothes did that old man wear? Do you have a definite answer? Have you heard? The unparalleled assassin, the black-robed old man? Yes, I've heard that it was Dugu Cho who did it himself. If it wasn't him, who else would have such a skill? Huh. Really? But why did I hear that it was Jun Moyen who did it? That can't be right. I heard that it was the unrivaled expert Ling Xiaozue who made an exception to protect Heaven Tang Anha. Anyway, it was an old man dressed in black. There's no doubt about it, have you heard? Dugu Chou made his move. He killed the dark cloud demon with a single strike. He's an unparalleled expert with unparalleled majesty. Of course I've heard about it. Sigh, I'm finally hearing about this unparalleled expert again. I'm comforted. It's said that no one knows him, but it's within reason. A strong expert like him has long returned to his natural state, keeping an exceedingly low profile. However, many experts have already analyzed it. That black robe is proof. It's said that Dugu Chou has been wearing that hue ever since his beloved wife passed away. Yes, yes, yes. I've heard about it too. Dugu Chou misses his deceased wife. He sits before the grave every day, his back is bent, yes. But the most convincing thing is still his sword. It's a sword that can shake the heavens and the earth. Dugu Chou's sword. The sword known as the Sword of Solitude. That's right. The unrivaled expert lives up to his reputation. That's not right. Ling Xiaozue is the publicly acknowledged unrivaled expert. How can Dugu Chou be the unrivaled expert? So what if I say Dugu Chou is the unrivaled expert? Oh Dugu Chou, the Dugu Chou who fell behind the clouds for the sake of his beloved. This is the irreplaceable unrivaled expert in my heart. The day you died was the day dark clouds engulfed Tiantang City. Do you remember? Of course I remember. Why? At that time, did you feel a very, very lonely feeling? Did you? Now that you mention it. I think I did. That's right. Let me tell you, it was Dugu Chou who did it, using his heartbreak sword of solitude. Huh? Heartbreak sword of solitude? The sword is like its name, the technique is just like its name. I see. No wonder, no wonder. But I heard that young Master Yun, how can you believe that? Young Master Yun has a little bit of cultivation base, but, heh. That's true. Young Master Yun is good at fooling around with girls and popinjays, but when it comes to fighting demons, yes, news like this had somehow spread throughout Tiantang City, almost everyone was discussing this topic. Ordinary Tiantang citizens, martial artists, assassins, sects, officials, Dugu Chou had reappeared in the world. Dugu Chou had come. Dugu Chou had come for the dictum of death. Dugu Chou had come to Tiantang City. Dugu Chou had slain a demon. It was as if everything was a fact. Outside the city, a grey-clothed old man walked into Tiantang City with unsteady steps. His back was hunched, his hair was white and his face was weathered with loneliness. No matter how one looked at him, he looked like an old man with one foot in the grave. If one had to point out the difference between this old man and an ordinary old man, it would probably be the long bundle he carried on his back. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that it was a sword. A sword? At the city gate, the soldiers looked at the grey-clothed old man with indescribable respect and reverence in their eyes. It was as if they had seen a deity. You're here, old man, please enter the city quickly. Travel permit? Why would I need a travel permit? Your arrival is a big deal. Please, please, the grey-clothed old man's murky eyes widened from the unexpected attention. What was going on? It had been so many years since I last came out. How could so many people still recognize me? It was rather bewildering. May I ask if your old senior Dugu, the guard at the city gate asked respectfully from the bottom of his heart. The grey-clothed old man was even more shocked. Did he really know me? Did he not mistake me for someone else? It's nothing, it's nothing. Old Senior Dugu, please, the guard at the city gate wiped his sweat, his heart pounding, his mouth dry in an instant. He had admitted it, he had admitted it. It was really, oh my God, I've actually seen a legend with my own eyes. The gray-clothed old man entered the city in a daze, but he could feel many people looking at him with reverent gazes along the way. His bewilderment grew. Some of the Jianghu people had just seen him, and their faces immediately turned as white as a sheet, without any trace of blood. When he arrived at the city center, he found an inn and entered. In the end, he was given the best room in the inn, and the innkeeper directly stated that he didn't need to pay, and that he could stay as long as he wanted. As for the person who was originally staying in that room, he moved out without saying a word, and even invited him in as if he was his ancestor. The gray-clothed old man grew more and more surprised by what he had encountered. This did not seem to be normal, or rather, it was too abnormal. His curiosity piqued, he quietly activated his supernatural power to listen to the conversations of the people within a few thousand feet radius. He immediately understood what had happened. Dugu Chou had attacked here? Killed the demon who brought disaster to the world with a single strike? Saved the people of this city? The gray-clothed old man was bewildered. I've never done anything. Although I'm no longer in the martial world, there are still legends about me in the martial world. This is the norm, but I didn't do anything, but the martial world has forced my reputation to be a legend and a myth. Isn't this too much? Chapter 589. This old man in gray who had just entered Tiantang City was, without a doubt, the real Dugu Chou. Due to the sudden reappearance of the long-lost dictum of death, the murderous intent that had lain dormant in his heart for a long time made Dugu Chou feel that his body and mind were shaken once more. It was also at this moment that he suddenly realized a fact. He had been called a peerless expert by the world for a long time, but when it came to fame and legendary status, he seemed to still be quite a distance away from Sun Chongkong back then. At the very least, he could not do it. After so many years of passing away, he could only rely on the hint of murderous intent hidden in the dictum of death to spread it across the entire continent, shocking the entire continent's assassins and causing them to flock to him. It was because of this that Dugu Chou's long-dormant thoughts turned once more and he descended the mountain. I thought that I had reached the pinnacle of this world, that there was no longer a path ahead of me. Therefore, while I'm here with you, I'm also waiting for my end. When the day comes, I'll bury myself under this tree and truly be with you forever. But now, I know that there's a realm in this world that's even higher than mine. It turns out that there's still a path ahead of me. Therefore, I want to see what the scenery of my unfinished path is like. Don't worry. Whether I succeed or not, no matter what the scenery is like, I'll come back to accompany you 3 years later. Dugu Chou stood before the grave and left behind these words. He then carried the treasured sword that had been sealed for 500 years and walked out of the mysterious valley. Throughout his journey until he stepped into Tiantang City, his heart had been calm and unruffled. There was nothing in this world that could move Dugu Chou and cause ripples in his heart. However, the moment Dugu Chou stepped into Tiantang City's territory, he felt something strange. Everything that he saw and heard before him seemed to be completely different from what he knew. This world was completely different. It was strange. It was strange. Could it be that the memory and eyesight of people nowadays are unimaginably good? I haven't stepped foot in the martial world for 500 years, but they still remember me. This was Dugu Chou's initial thought, but he was enlightened later on. This isn't what I did. It's just someone forcing me to take the blame. Then, a thought popped up in his mind, then who was the one who put the blame on me? His next thought was a terrifying conspiracy theory. But how did this person know that I would come? He even grasped the timing so perfectly. Could it be that in this world, there was actually someone who could track me and completely grasp my movements? This is simply inconceivable, preposterous. His final thought was, there is no such person in this world. It is probably a coincidence. The mastermind did not know that I would come. He just threw the blame on a legendary person out of habit. After all, I have not shown myself for too long. Perhaps I have already passed away. It is a clever move to throw the blame on me. However, the enemy's arrangements are so meticulous. Now that I've reappeared, I'm bound to be in big trouble. However, so what if there's trouble? In this world, is there any trouble that I can't handle? Having thought through everything, Dugu Cho, who had a clear mind, did not plan to conceal his whereabouts anymore. Since everyone knows that I've reappeared in this world, everyone knows me, and everyone knows that I'm staying here, then so be it. I'll stay here and live here openly with my original face. I'll see who in this world dares to cause trouble for me. Is there really a trouble in this world that I can't afford to offend? If there really is, then it will be the most valuable thing of this trip. If there really is, then it will be the most valuable thing of this trip. Just like that, Dugu Cho moved into the best room in the inn and stayed there peacefully. The inn that Dugu Cho stayed in was neither big nor small. It was located right in the middle of the outer city, outside the inner city. It was not exactly luxurious, but it was not deserted either. However, from the moment Dugu Cho checked into the inn had instantly turned into the martial world's holy land. Many Jianghu people came from all directions just to take a look at this inn from afar. Then, they left with a sigh on their faces. However, with every step they took, they turned their heads back. They were full of emotions, their interest waning. It was thought-provoking. Dugu Cho. That's the legendary Dugu Cho. If it's possible, I'd like to stay in this inn as well, but it's too deliberate and pretentious to go there now. It'll only provoke disgust and bring about my own destruction. Forget it. As for the martial world people who happened to be staying in the inn, they were thinking of a different matter. With Dugu Cho staying here, even if they were to eat and drink as they usually did, they were afraid that they would disturb the other party. Even if they wanted to let out a fart in the middle of the night, they would have to hold it in, for a moment of carelessness might bring about a fatal disaster. The discomfort was indescribable. Therefore, from the second day onwards, the martial world people who were initially proud of staying in the same inn as Dugu Cho found excuses to check out. A myth was a myth, of course, it was good. However, it was best if one only existed in a myth. Once a myth was in front of them and interfered with the lives of the common people, the only outcome would be horror. Everything else aside, just imagine that if someone were to fight Dugu Cho here, the shockwave alone would be enough to kill them 800 times over. They could not afford to offend him. Since they knew that they could not afford to offend him, they had better hide as far away as they could, away from this place of trouble. Yes, this place that was destined to be a place of trouble. By the afternoon of the second day, there was no one else in the inn other than the innkeeper, the staff, and a handful of people. The only guest left was brother Dugu Cho. Just when the innkeeper was certain that his inn wouldn't have any more business in the short term, a middle-aged man calmly went through the check-in procedures under the astonished gazes of everyone in the inn and officially moved into the inn. The middle-aged man did not stop after he entered his room. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he knocked on Dugu Cho's door and asked, "Is anyone in?" The innkeeper craned his neck to watch from below, thinking, "I don't think I've told you which room Dugu Cho is staying in. How did you find it so accurately? Could it be that you're a demigod?" The door opened. The gray-clothed elder appeared at the door and asked with a frown, "Who are you?" Chapter 590. This sentence was really awesome. The innkeeper almost fell over when he heard that. Guess? F***CKU. I feel like my inn is going to be torn down just because of this statement. Who do you think you're talking to? That's Dugu Cho, the legend of this world, the myth of the human realm, Dugu Cho. It looked like his inn was about to welcome Dugu Cho's first blood sacrifice since his reappearance. It was a pity that things did not always go as one wished. Dugu Cho was not angered. Instead, he said with a smile, I've guessed it. The middle-aged man smiled and said, That's great. Shall we have a drink later? Dugu Cho nodded. Sure. Faced with the scene before him, the inn owner felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. What was going on? Guess? I've guessed it, a myth of the legends indeed. Even the way he spoke was different. Amidst the bewilderment, an epiphany rose in the inn owner's mind. This middle-aged man was probably a terrifying figure of the legends as well. Otherwise, how could he converse with Dugu Cho, who was like a myth of the human realm? About an hour after the middle-aged man checked in, another old man with snow-white hair and beard also checked into the inn. After moving his luggage into the room, he slowly went over and knocked on the door of the room. The door opened and the gray-clothed elder, Dugu Cho, appeared. Who are you? The white-haired elder who came later replied with a grin, Guess? Below, the head of the innkeeper was covered in cold sweat, dripping profusely. Today was truly a day of shock. Dugu Cho said, I haven't guessed it yet. The elder said with a grin, Why don't we talk about it after we have a drink tonight? I have the best wine in the world here. Dugu Cho said, Oh? I've guessed who you are now. The elder laughed. It doesn't matter whether you can guess it or not. See you tonight. After getting the affirmative answer, the white-haired elder returned to his room without another word. The inn owner was speechless. Just like that, another 2 hours passed, and another person checked into the inn. The man was in a sorry state. He looked as if he had fallen apart and was barely holding on. He was so skinny that his skin was wrapped around his bones. When he stretched out his hands, if it weren't for the flesh on them, the innkeeper would have thought that he was a skeleton. Just as he staggered into his room, he paused for a moment before he came to Dugu Cho's door and knocked on it. Another one knocked on the door. The inn owner thought to himself that if he were Dugu Cho, he would be furious to be disturbed so many times. Unexpectedly, the door opened, and Dugu Cho, who had appeared at the door, looked as calm and unfazed as before. Who are you? Take a guess. It was the same 2 sentences that were repeated like a bol. The boss thinks, King. I think this mythical expert, Dugu Cho, who has already moved in, is an imposter. He was teased like this 3 times in one afternoon. If it were me, even if I didn't go crazy, I would still be furious and draw my sword in anger to settle the score. Your guesses. Dugu Cho was a good-tempered man. He did not lose his temper and said faintly, I can't guess. The skeleton-like person said, How about I perform a divination for you in a moment? It's free of charge. Dugu Cho thought about it and said, I've guessed who you are. Shall we drink together tonight? You want to kill me, but I'm ashamed to accept it. I'll buy you a drink first, then it won't be considered free. The previous 2 men had taken the initiative to invite him for a drink, but Dugu Cho had taken the initiative to invite this skeleton-like person. The inn owner's first reaction was that even if this person did not shed tears of gratitude, he should at least be overwhelmed by the favor. Unexpectedly, the skeleton-like person did not react in the slightest. Instead, he said naturally, Sure, let's drink tonight. I'll read your fortune after we're done. It was the same day that Yun Yang was almost driven mad by Shui Wuin's incessant messages. There was no other reason for it, there were just too many messages. Of course, he was most interested in a few of them. Confirmed. 500 years ago, the Heaven Leaderboard's top expert, Dugu Cho, has entered Tiantang City and is currently staying. There was a person who stayed in the inn that Dugu Cho stayed in when no one dared approach it. Another person, there's no movement from the Four Seasons Tower now. The assassin organization is restless, they might strike at any time. There's a sudden increase in the number of people coming and going from the Crown Prince's residence. It's quite a commotion. Dugu Cho had actually come. Yun Yang was taken aback by this change. Just as Dugu Cho had expected, Yun Yang did not expect the man to really appear. It had been more than 500 years since Dugu Cho had last made an official appearance. It was because of this that Yun Yang had released the news to divert attention. In spite of this, Dugu Cho had reappeared at this critical juncture. Did that not mean that the fake news that he had released had become the truth? Was this a stroke of luck? In any case, it was still a pleasant surprise. Dugu Cho is currently confirmed to have appeared in a small inn in Tiantang City. If he had really made a move a few days ago, it's possible that he could have killed Elder Yen with a single strike. He has been away from the martial world for 500 years. Who knows how much his cultivation base has improved by now, but it's only a possibility. How much longer until the school's reinforcements arrive? You'd better go see what Dugu Cho wants first. Just take a look, don't cause any more trouble. Yes. That night. On such a cold day, the innkeeper had thoughtfully placed a brazier under a small table. Around the table, 4 braziers were placed in each of the 4 directions, filled with burning charcoal. For a moment, the entire inn was warm and cozy, like a spring breeze. The 4 of them each occupied a corner, their expressions calm and unruffled. I've roamed the martial world my entire life, but this is the first time I've had a gathering like this. This trip has been worthwhile. The white-bearded old man was the first to speak with a smile. Not bad at all. If it wasn't for Senior Dugu's unexpected return to the mortal realm, I'm afraid we wouldn't have the chance to gather like this in this lifetime. The middle-aged man, who was dressed in a green robe, smiled faintly and said, "Actually, it's enough for some things to happen once in a lifetime. Besides, I'm afraid we'll have to stay here for a few more days. The world is like a game of chess, unpredictable." The skeletal man grinned and said, "Who can know if it's unpredictable or not? The so-called rare is just that everything is difficult at the beginning. With the first time, the second time won't be too far away." The white-haired old man flashed a lecherous grin and said, "What you said actually made me think of women." Before the white-haired old man's words echoed in the air, the 4 of them burst out laughing. Even Dugu Cho was laughing so hard that he almost cried. The innkeeper was cooking, his ears perked up. He curled his lips discreetly. Surprisingly, he also understood the meaning of the words as he smirked. "Guess who these people are? My eyesight has stabilized, it's only dropped by 0.2 points. My body is completely normal. My new glasses have arrived as well. I've already left for home. In a few days, I'll start to make up for it." Chapter 591. A few appetizers were served. With a wave of the white-haired elder's hand, a pot of wine appeared on the table. "Just one pot?" The skeletal man said, "I haven't even had a sip of water in so many years. It's rare that I can drink your wine, and you're only giving me 1 pot?" The white-haired elder snorted and said, "You don't understand drinking. If you take out hundreds of pots of good wine at once, everyone will think that it's worthless. It's too much. Besides, one can only drink 8 taels at most if they can drink a caddy of it. It's to make everyone think that it's too little. Then, everyone will have a sense of, I have to drink more to avoid losing out. Only then will the drinking be interesting." The white-haired elder explained with a look of disdain. "Brilliant." Dugu Cho and the middle-aged man beside him gleamed. The skeletal man chuckled as well. As he removed the mud seal, he asked, "How many pots of this wine do you have?" The white-haired elder answered, "There's only 1 pot in this world." All 3 of them were dumbfounded. "Only 1 pot? Really?" The middle-aged man asked in surprise, "Why do I feel like there's not much truth in your words?" The white-haired elder was unperturbed. "Believe it or not, it's up to you." The mud seal was removed. The aroma of the wine rose instantly, forming a hazy mist. Within the mist, there were mountains, rivers, and images of heaven and earth that lingered for a long time. The white-haired elder was reserved, the corners of his lips tinged with pride. Even Dugu Cho and the middle-aged man were mesmerized by such a fine wine. They praised, "Great wine. It's truly the best wine in the world." The skeleton-like man didn't say anything. The two of them watched as the mist in the air quickly dissipated. When they turned their heads, they saw that the skeleton-like man had already impatiently picked up the wine jar and poured himself a bowl full of wine. Then, he held the wine pot in one hand while the other picked up the bowl swiftly. With a swoosh, he finished the wine and began to pour it into his own bowl. "Slow down," Dugu Cho said angrily, "how can you eat alone?" The middle-aged man also shouted, "How much of such fine wine can there be in this world? You actually stole it." The skeletal man snorted. "What do you know? For a drunkard like me, this is the greatest respect to the one who brewed this wine." Dugu Cho and the middle-aged man scoffed at the same time, but it did make sense when they thought about it. Seeing that there was not much wine left, both of them began to fight for it. "Mine. My bowl." The skeleton refused to let go of the wine pot. Dugu Cho extended his arm and shot a wine arrow into his bowl. The middle-aged man opened his mouth and an orange-yellow wine arrow flew right into his mouth. A jar of wine was almost gone with a whoosh. The three of them burst into laughter. "Awesome!" They spoke in unison. "Where's the wine?" The three of them put down their wine bowls and looked at the white-haired old man. The white-haired old man stared speechlessly at the empty wine jar that was spinning on the table. He took out a jar of wine and smelled it, and it was gone. As the host who had treated them, he had not even had the chance to drink a drop. "All of you aren't courteous at all." The white-haired old man snorted and said in annoyance, "My wine is gone the moment I take it out. But how can my wine taste so good?" Dugu Cho said with interest, "Oh. So you're saying that you're asking for our help, that's why you're treating us to wine? Can you understand it this way?" The white-haired old man snorted and said, "Of course. Since you've drunk my wine, of course you have to do something for me. In this old man's entire life, I've never treated a guest with my wine for nothing." The old man's words were domineering. In spite of this, Dugu Cho and the other two exchanged glances and guffawed at the same time. "Old man, let me tell you, you found the right person to treat us today. In this world, there are too few things that we can't do ourselves." The middle-aged man in green smiled and said, "However, a jar of wine won't be enough to get someone to do something." The skeletal man came to a sudden realization and said, "That's right, that's right. My temper has always been that if I don't drink enough wine, I won't do anything." The white-haired old man was dumbfounded and said angrily, "You're an expert after all. How dare you threaten me like this? You are the giants of the Jianhu, where is your heroic spirit?" He turned to look at Dugu Cho with a huff and said, "Luckily there's old brother Dugu. Old brother Dugu has promised me just now. It doesn't matter whether the two of you do it or not." Dugu Cho was dumbfounded. "When did I promise you?" The white-haired old man was dumbfounded. "I said that you found the right person. There aren't many things in this world that we can't do, am I right?" Dugu Cho asked, "Is that what I meant?" "I only said that there aren't many things that I can't do. I didn't say whether I'm willing to do these things or not, did I?" The white-haired old man coughed violently, his face and neck flushed. He was so angry that he could not even speak. Pointing at them, he bellowed, You! How can you be so shameless?" Dugu Cho rolled his eyes. With a flick of his hand, the empty jar of wine spun on the table as he murmured, "This wine is delicious. It's just that it's a little too little. As little as the things that can't be done." The middle-aged man in green caressed the wine bowl and sighed softly. 1,000 cups are too little when drinking with a bosom friend. But if the wine isn't enough, then it's really too much to say when we don't see eye to eye." The skeletal man knocked the wine bowl with the chopsticks in his hand and sang loudly, "Ding ding ding, dang dang dang, ding 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 dang dang dang. Good wine, the wine smells so good, I won't force you if you don't give it to me. No wine, no discussion, no help means no help. No discussion, no help. Dang dang." Dugucho and the middle-aged man in green laughed until tears streamed down their cheeks. The white-haired old man was shaking with rage. He glared at them and asked, "Are you helping or not?" "No." The three of them had a tacit understanding. "You've crossed the line." The white-haired old man's beard twitched in anger. All four of them were old, and it was obvious that they had never met each other before. Even after meeting each other, other than a simple guess, none of them had announced their names. However, sitting together, laughing and bickering, it felt like they were old friends who had known each other for decades. They were definitely not strangers whom they had just met. Not at all. The three of them shook their heads in unison. Guarding the god of wine. Trying your best to extort more good wine out of him. That's really crossing the line. The white-haired old man's expression changed as he glared at the three of them. Suddenly, he threw his head back and guffawed, cursing, King hell. With a flick of his wrist, another jar of wine was placed on the table. He said angrily, "This is the only one left. There's no more." The three men's eyes shone. They had already snatched it over and opened it swiftly before pouring it into their respective cups, ignoring the white-haired old man's words. The white-haired old man poured his own wine bowl as well, murmuring, "If I don't drink, I won't even be able to drink the wine I brewed myself." Dugucho rubbed his belly and sighed, "My addiction to wine has been triggered. I don't want to work anymore. What should I do?" The middle-aged man in green looked distressed as well. "Me too," the skeletal man said, "From now on, I won't speak anymore. Everything they say represents me." The white-haired old man was speechless with rage. After a long while, he suddenly gritted his teeth and stomped his feet. With a wave of his hand, wine filled the table, under the table, and in the tavern's hall. He bellowed, "Drink all of you to death." The three of them squealed in glee, "It's coming. Sure enough, this old man has to be blackmailed. You won't get any wine if you beg him nicely. That's right, we have to blackmail him. The rumors are true. That's right." The white-haired old man was exasperated. "Who said that you can't beg nicely? Have you?" The three of them were stunned. The air was silent before a roar of laughter ensued. "Speak. What is it that made you come out of seclusion and seek us for help?" Dugucho asked. The white-haired old man chuckled. "Actually, if I hadn't met you, I would have done it myself. But since I've met you, I can't be bothered to do it myself. Some time ago, a descendant of an old friend of mine came to me and told me that he was tricked. Someone disguised himself as me and used my name to become his ancestor. He even used my identity to wreak havoc in the empire of Zio. I was rather angry about this, even though my friend's descendant told me repeatedly that this person wasn't a bad person and didn't tarnish my reputation. Still, how can this old man's name be borrowed so easily?" The white-haired old man said angrily. "I didn't expect such a thing to happen." Dugucho and the skeletal man exchanged a glance and guffawed. The middle-aged man in green frowned, looking at Feng Xianga with a doubtful gaze. This white-haired old man who was known as the god of wine was, of course, the phantom physician god of wine, the legend of a generation, Feng Xianga. "Who is this person?" the skeletal man asked, guffawing. "The Pillar of Yutong, the only survivor of the 9 Supremes, Lord Supreme Cloud." Feng Xianga snorted. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire inn suddenly fell silent. Chapter 592. This old man knows that Lord Supreme Cloud is a national hero, a truly great figure who shakes the heavens and the earth. I have my own reasons for borrowing my name. I have no choice but to do so. However, I can't take this lying down. Feng Xianga said, so, we just need to find him and punish him lightly. The middle-aged man in green chuckled humorlessly and sighed, standing up abruptly. He began to fish out items from his robes. Gold notes, silver notes, jade marrow crystals. Then, he opened his spatial ring and poured out a pile of treasured resources, saying calmly, Feng Xianga, look. Do you like anything here? Feng Xianga was genuinely shocked this time, stuttering, what do you mean? The middle-aged man said, if there's anything that catches your eye, Brother Feng, just say it. Here are the soul-sucking vine, the psychedelic grass, the netherworld vermilion fruit, and the drunken orchid from the previous year. These are all items that can be used to brew exquisite wine. How about I give them all to Brother Feng? Feng Xianga's expression changed as he said, what do you mean? You have to make it clear. The middle-aged man said, I wonder if these can make up for Brother Feng's wine that I've drunk just now? If not, I'll think of something else. Feng Xianga was taken aback before he flew into a rage. Ling Xiaozue. What do you mean? Although this old man has never met you, you don't have to humiliate me like this. In his agitation, his voice was much louder than before. When the innkeeper, who had been listening attentively, heard this name, he felt as if 3 thunderbolts had suddenly sounded in his head, and he almost fainted from the shock. Ling Xiaozue. Ling Xiaozue. I was wondering who would have the guts to knock on Dugu Chao's door and have the guts to make Dugu Chao guess. It turned out to be the publicly acknowledged unrivaled expert in recent years. The identities of 3 of the 4 people who had been drinking were now clear. Dugu Chao, Ling Xiaozue, and Feng Xianga. They were the pinnacle experts of legends and myths. They were the legends of a generation. The stories of these 3 people had spread far and wide. Their deeds had become legends that everyone in Tianxian continent was familiar with. Then who was the last person? Ling Xiaozue was not enraged when he heard Feng Xianga's question, but explained patiently, it's a helpless thing to say. I can't help you with this. Feng Xianga was stunned. I couldn't help you, but I drank the wine that could only be drunk with help. Ling Xiaozue said faintly, therefore, I have to compensate you. And I want double the compensation. Why is that? Feng Xianga mumbled. Ling Xiaozue chuckled. Not only can I not help you, but I also have to obstruct the people who help you. Feng Xianga's eyes widened. There was actually such a godly twist. Feng Xianga could not help but be stunned, not knowing what to say for a moment. With Ling Xiaozue in the way, this matter would be difficult to resolve. At this moment, when the innkeeper heard Ling Xiaozue's words, he felt a rush of blood coursing through his veins. He dashed over and knelt before Ling Xiaozue. This lowly one thanks Lord Ling for your care and concern for our nation's Lord Supreme Cloud. This lowly one kowtows to Lord Ling. Bam, 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 under everyone's shocked gaze, the innkeeper kowtowed thrice consecutively. He wanted to continue but was pulled up by Dugu Chao with a sharp gaze. Why is this? The innkeeper was only an ordinary person, his cultivation base like a shrimp, but he was stern when faced with Dugu Chao, an expert who was above the clouds. Lord Supreme Cloud is Yutong's pillar, a Buddha to all. We, the common folk, can only wish for Lord Supreme Cloud to live a smooth life, to be free from sickness and pain. As long as Lord Supreme Cloud is still around, we'll have something to rely on. We'll have something to look forward to. We're not that capable. Other than blessing Lord Supreme Cloud, we'll also curse Lord Supreme Cloud's enemies to die a horrible death. The sooner they die, the better. The words of this insignificant person in the mortal world made the 4 peerless experts in the world fall into silence. Why? Dugu Chao asked after a moment of silence. No reason. Although the innkeeper was a little afraid and his body was trembling, he still said boldly, because that's Lord Supreme Cloud, because this lowly one is Yutong's man. Well said. The skeletal man praised and turned to look at Feng Xiang, saying, I can't help you with this, but after drinking your wine, I can point the way for you 3 times. These 3 times of guidance can save you or the person you designate from certain death 3 times. Feng Xiang was even more stunned. He was still a little lost. Looking at Ling Xiaozui and the skeletal man who looked a little embarrassed, he felt even worse. What was going on? People of Ling Xiaozui's level would not usually promise anything, but once they did, there would be no going back on it. Since they were willing to sit down and drink with him, it was equivalent to saying, whatever you need, we'll do it for you. There was no way it could be fake. However, it was completely different now. A mere supreme cloud had actually made both of them change their minds at the same time. Even if it went against their usual principles, even if they owed him a bigger favor, they would not do it. What was going on? Why couldn't he understand this world? Feng Xiang chuckled humorlessly and asked, what about you, Dugu? Dugu Cho was silent for a moment before he said, this old man doesn't care. However, if Lord Supreme Cloud is truly such a loyal official who serves the country and the people, this old man can only warn him on your behalf. I can't do anything more than that. Feng Xiang laughed and said, if that's the case, why would I still trouble Supreme Cloud? Forget it. Let's just let this matter go. As long as Lord Supreme Cloud doesn't come into my hands, this old man won't trouble him anymore. He smiled and said, however, this old man was the one who cancelled this, so it's impossible for you to owe me a favor. Instead, I'm the one who went back on my word. I should be the one to treat everyone to a drink. The other 3 men laughed in unison. Makes sense, makes sense. It was at this moment that the sound of galloping horses could be heard from outside. The sound was far away. However, with the 4 experts here, no one was breathing loudly within a few miles. It was quiet. Under such circumstances, the sound of galloping horses was abrupt and crisp. The eyes of the 4 men shone brightly. An unparalleled steed. The skeletal man praised, this sound. This old man has never seen anything like it in my life. Ling Xiaozui drank a mouthful of wine and said, this old man has never seen anything like this in my life. Dugu Chao's ears were tilted to the side, listening to the incessant galloping like thunder. A strange longing expression hung on his face as he said faintly, this is a king of horses. I didn't expect such a magnificent steed to exist in this world after hunger all those years ago. Before his words echoed in the air, a horse had suddenly stopped at the entrance of the inn. It was clad in red. It was like a ball of fire, burning as it galloped in the darkness. It seemed like it had always been there, but it stopped abruptly. Dugu Chao's eyes widened abruptly. The skeletal man's pupils shrunk. Looking at the person on the horse, a mysterious smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Ling Xiaozui sighed. Why was this fellow here? Although this was a great opportunity for this fellow, Feng Xiang's desire for revenge had just been suppressed by the 3 of them. This was the moment when he was the most frustrated, though he did not say it aloud. This guy definitely shouldn't have come at this time. On the back of the horse, there was a young man in purple. His face was like jade and his figure was like a tree in the wind. His eyes were filled with joy as he jumped down from the horse and shouted, Brother Ling. You're here. Why didn't you tell me that you were coming here? You almost made me break my legs. Everyone curled their lips. You clearly rode a horse here. How did you break your leg? The youth had already rushed over and plopped himself down on the stool by the table, leaning close to Ling Xiaozui and guffawed, Brother Ling, let's not go home until we're drunk today. He picked up a pot of Feng Xiang's wine and broke the clay seal with a slap. Raising both hands, he laughed and said, "Brother Ling, the wine of the god of wine, Feng Xiang'e, is gone now. However, we're brothers. Whatever wine we drink, it's all Feng Xiang'e's wine. Come, come, let me toast you." Unexpectedly, he raised his head and gulped down the entire jar of wine. Wiping his mouth, he praised, "Great wine." Lifting his head, he saw that the people at the table were looking at him like he was a god. Feeling a little lost, he wiped his mouth and asked, "What is it?" Chapter 593. What's wrong? Ling Xiaozue almost face-bombed when he heard the word. "What do you think, brother? You've gone overboard with your pretentiousness." Among the three of them, Dugucho still looked indifferent while Feng Xiang'e's eyes were wide with shock, glaring at the child who had barged in. The skeleton-like fellow, on the other hand, had a meaningful look written all over his face. His gaze towards Yunyang was nonchalant, but in the depths of his eyes that no one could see was the thrill and excitement of having found a treasure. "Brother Ling. This is nothing, is it?" Yunyang scratched his head and shot Ling Xiaozue a look. However, Yunyang understood something from Ling Xiaozue's reaction. Ling Xiaozue looked at Yunyang, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He was speechless for a moment. It was just a random entry, a casual remark, but it had made the four pinnacle men of the world react differently. Just this move alone was undeniably powerful. Originally, the four of them were sitting around drinking wine. Not to mention the atmosphere, just the aura created by the four of them was not ordinary. However, a person that the other three did not know suddenly barged in, and even targeted one of them. This situation inevitably caused the other three to more or less feel displeased. "Who are you? Is this a place you come to? Even if you know that person, do you know me? You've come in and you're drinking, chatting, and jumping around so familiarly. Who do you think you are?" This fellow who had come out of nowhere sat down and gulped down a pot of wine without treating himself as an outsider. That was the world's finest wine brewed by the god of wine, Feng Xiang'e. There were only a few pots left in this world. Who did he think he was, drinking it just like that? In spite of it, the group was caught between laughter and tears when they heard the young man's words, unable to move. He had drunk an entire pot of Feng Xiang'e's wine without batting an eyelid right in front of the god of wine. He had then smacked his lips and said that he had no more of Feng Xiang'e's wine and could only replace it with other wines, yet, what he had drunk was obviously Feng Xiang'e's wine. "Who is this young brother?" Feng Xiang'e asked in a low voice, squinting at the uninvited young man. There was a hint of displeasure in his tone. In such a grand event of the century, the participants were the pinnacle of the world. You, a young man with an unimpressive appearance and skills. Even if you had an impressive appearance and a high cultivation base because of your age, you are still not qualified to participate in this grand event. As the organizer of the event, Feng Xiang'e was naturally displeased with this uninvited guest. "What I wanted to do was directly rejected, I drank for nothing, and there was even a hothead." Ling Xiaozue coughed and said, "This young man is my little brother. Every time I come to Tiantang City, I can't avoid meeting this young brother. We are friends despite the difference in age." Under the bewildered gazes of the trio, Ling Xiaozue added the last sentence as if he was possessed by some unknown force. However, this last sentence caused a certain uninvited guest's status to soar. Although he still couldn't be compared to everyone present, he was no longer someone who couldn't participate on the same stage. Just the fact that he was Ling Xiaozue's friend despite the difference in age meant that he had the status, value, and qualification. If he had the status of being the world's unrivaled expert's friend, he would be qualified as well. "Oh. We're friends, despite our age." The skeleton-like guy let out a long sigh meaningfully. He actually sounded a little eccentric. "Cough, my young brother is straightforward and sincere, chivalrous, courageous and generous. It's his chance to be here today, and it's everyone's chance too. Come, let's get to know each other and be friends. Ling Xiaozui's face was a little twisted as he forced a smile. Although Ling Xiaozui was full of flattery and flattering Yun Yang, what he really wanted to do now was to beat Yun Yang up. However, he had to uphold Yun Yang's reputation. After all, Yun Yang had done him a great favor. Without Yun Yang's help back then, he would not be who he was today, nor would he have achieved what he had today. Thinking of this, Ling Xiaozui truly felt that this fellow was fearless, as if he was certain that he would be the one to win. You've come here so recklessly because you're sure that I'll endorse you, haven't you? Although I will indeed endorse for you, who asked me to do that to you? What are you talking about, Brother Ling? Brother Ling's friends are my friends, your brothers are my brothers. Yun Yang said amicably. This young brother Yun Yang greets the 3 old brothers here. I haven't asked, what are the names of the 3 old brothers? I dare not speak about other places, but it's considered home for the 3 of you to come to Tiantang City. This territory is this young brother's home ground. I'll be there for everything. There won't be a problem. Ling Xiaozui remained silent with a dark expression. At this moment, his desire to send this fellow flying with a slap grew even stronger. Although what Yun Yang had said could be considered as having a point, he was indeed a local tyrant in Tiantang City, a dragon on the outside. He had the right and the ability to spout such arrogant words, especially that little bit of luck that made others jealous. Did he know who these 3 people before him were? If they really wanted to do something, would they need Yun Yang? No, you must know who these 3 people are. If you didn't, you might not have come even if you were beaten to death. The skeletal figure seemed to be suppressing his laughter as he chuckled and pulled Feng Xianga over, introducing him grandly. So it's Yutong's King Xiaoyao's heir, young Master Yun Yang. I've long heard of young Master Yun's name. I'm here to rely on young Master Yun's strength. Come, let me introduce to young Master Yun. This is the god of wine, Feng Xianga. Once this person spoke, even Yun Yang felt his face stiffen, let alone Ling Xiaozui and the others. Who was this fellow? Yun Yang was well aware of the identities of 3 of the 4 people present, but he did not know who this skeletal fellow was and what his background was. However, what he had said out of the blue was embarrassing indeed. What did I say just now? What I said just now was obviously a joke to ease the awkward atmosphere. Why did you take it seriously and take advantage of the situation? This trick should be used by a junior like me. Isn't it too embarrassing for you to use it like this? Although I don't know who you are, you're an expert who drank with Feng Xianga, Ling Xiaozui, and Dugu Chou after all. Can you be a little more shameless? It's an honor to meet you. I'm really sorry about what happened just now. Yun Yang was truly stupefied now. He had not expected such a martial world senior to play his cards so unpredictably. For a moment, he was embarrassed and stammered, which was rare for him. Feng Xianga glanced at the skeletal fellow in rebuke and chuckled dryly. It's all right. Young Master Yun, you don't have to be so courteous. Young Master's name is indeed known throughout the world. It's like thunder piercing my ears. Yun Yang coughed and raised his goblet. I've only drunk senior's wine once before this. It's truly unforgettable. I was too excited to reunite with Big Brother Ling just now and have wasted much of senior's fine wine. It's impolite of me. This junior shall offer this wine to senior. Let this junior offer a toast to senior. His eyes were filled with sincerity as he said, Senior, perhaps you don't know this but you're my idol. I've grown up listening to your legendary stories since I was young. Yun Yang, who had skipped the awkward atmosphere, repeated the actor's acting skills and spoke with great emotion, revealing his true feelings. Feng Xianga choked at the words. Oh, young brother Yun, you're a heroic young man who's radiant and handsome. As he spoke, he ran out of words and turned to look at Ling Xiaozui. You've gone senile. Haven't you heard that young brother Yunyang is Yutong's King Xiaoyao's son? Ling Xiaozui added. Yes, yes. Young brother Yun is of noble blood, handsome and dashing. Feng Xiang'a suddenly stopped talking as he spoke. He felt that he had been led into the trap so easily. Why should this old man be courteous to such an insignificant child? You, Ling Xiaozui, treat him as a young brother, but what does that have to do with this old man? Do you really think this old man will use his relationship with an insignificant child like you? Then, he put on a straight face and said nothing more. This is. Yunyang was already mentally prepared, so he did not feel the slightest bit awkward. He turned to look at Dugu Chou, only to realize that the latter was looking back at him. He did not care about his impression now. All he wanted was a familiar face. Besides, with Ling Xiaozui here, he would not do anything to him. He was a natural aid. To his future plans, it would be immeasurably helpful. Otherwise, why would he rush over? No matter how great you are, I don't need to stick my warm face to your cold butt. That's because you're useful. No matter what, he had to drink this wine shamelessly. Chapter 594. Looking at Dugu Chou's gaze, however, Yunyang was rather surprised. There was a trace of excitement and nostalgia in Dugu Chou's gaze. Why, are you excited to see me? This old man's surname is Dugu. Dugu Chou said slowly, although you said that you're here for Ling Xiaozui, this old man doesn't believe that you didn't know who I am before coming here. His gaze was initially dull, but when he uttered the last few words, his eyelids fluttered. His gaze was like a bolt of lightning, causing Yunyang to feel as if two mountains had collided in his heart, exploding with a loud bang. For a moment, his deific consciousness was in a trance. Yunyang straightened up, retracting his frivolous, popinjay attitude and said seriously, of course, since Senior Dugu is here, this junior will definitely come to visit even if I have no other excuse. Dugu Chou's expression was indifferent as he said, a smart man should be honest. This is wisdom. Dugu Chou's words were unusually sharp, like the weight of a mountain falling on Yunyang. Dugu Chou had already decided that if the young man before him still maintained his previous attitude and tried to bluff his way through, he would teach him a lesson. Young men who achieved success at a young age often benefited from their momentary flash of inspiration. Most of them were just petty tricks. Using petty tricks often could solve many problems, but once they encountered a truly tricky problem, they would be caught in their own trap and even cause the situation to go out of control, leading to the worst possible outcome. Dugu Chou had come to a similar conclusion because of Yunyang's behavior, so he intended to punish him. Unexpectedly, as soon as he made a gesture, the little fellow immediately changed his attitude. It was as if he had changed his face. He directly tore off his previous disguise, and then in an instant, he changed into a humble, courteous, gentle, honest, and righteous image of respecting the old and loving the young. Dugu Chou felt that everything that he had intended to do had been futile. His punch that had been charged with energy felt like it had landed on a cloud. It was like a clay ox entering the sea, there was nothing he could do about it. Young Master Yun is indeed like his name, your surname is indeed Yun, Dugu Chou said faintly after holding it in for a moment. Senior is right, Yunyang said with a more respectful tone, his face filled with pride. The four experts looked at each other in dismay. For a moment, all of them had the urge to burst out laughing. Young Master Yun's surname was indeed Yun. These four words were a stroke of genius, but they also understood how Dugu Chou felt when he punched the air. It was appropriate to use the phrase here. Senior Dugu has always been paying attention to my horse. I wonder why? Yunyang asked in a humble manner. Dugu Chou sighed softly and said, this horse of yours. What's its name? Hong Hong. Yunyang was rather proud. This is the name I gave it myself. Does Senior think that the horse lives up to its name? The other three once again looked at each other in dismay. How could such a majestic horse be given such a girly name? How could it be appropriate? How could it be appropriate? That's right. This name is very good. Who would have thought that Dugucho would compliment Reddy? He looked at Reddy affectionately and said, "It should be called Reddy. Calling it anything else doesn't sound nice." Yunyang was stunned. Ling Xiaozui and the other two were stunned as well. What did he mean by that? Dugucho sighed and said, "It's a pity that such a majestic horse is in your hands." "That's right, it's a pity indeed," Yunyang replied casually. Dugucho was surprised to see him admit it so readily. He glanced at him and asked again, "How is it a pity? Why is it a pity?" Yunyang was dumbfounded, stunned on the spot. "Didn't you say it was a pity?" "I'm just going along with what you said. People nowadays are so difficult to get along with. Each of them has such a strange temperament. Is there no way to communicate properly?" After a pause, he said carefully, "The best choice for such a majestic horse is to return to the forest and roam freely for the rest of its life. Other than that, if it can gallop on the battlefield and assist its rider to be invincible, it would be a wonderful story. At the very least, it should be accompanying a masterful swordsman or the pinnacle of the world as they roam the martial world," Yunyang said. "As for me, I don't belong to any of the three. It's a pity that it stays by my side." A golden gleam flashed in Dugucho's eyes as he said, "Since you know this, why don't you let it go?" Yunyang chuckled dryly and said, "Reddy and I have never had a subordinate relationship. Since I got it, I've never added any harness to it. I've never even put a saddle or shoe on it. If it wants to leave, it can do so at any time. I don't know if Senior believes it, but Reddy and I are friends, we are best friends." Yunyang's gaze was warm as he looked at Reddy and said, "It can't bear to leave me. Perhaps one day in the future, when I leave this world and this body can no longer exist, it will leave on its own when it no longer has any lingering concerns." Reddy stood quietly outside the inn, its horse eyes looking at Yunyang with tenderness. It lowered its head and snorted, tilting its head to look at Dugucho and then at Yunyang, then back at Dugucho. There was a sharp glint in the horse's eyes as it let out a low growl at Dugucho. It was as if it was threatening, "Don't even think about touching my master." That was how Dugucho interpreted it. He could not help the admiration in his eyes as he said comfortingly, not bad at all. For such a spiritual creature, it should meet a good friend who loves it so much and can think of a way to help it. This place of yours can be considered as another excellent home for a precious horse, but it is difficult to replicate. However, this situation is a great fortune for both you and it." However, no matter how experienced and knowledgeable Dugucho was, how could he understand the true meaning of Reddy's growl? Reddy was actually trying to warn him, "Don't even think about touching my long-term meal ticket. This fellow has too much to offer. I won't leave even if you chase me away." Yunyang was surprised to see that Dugucho had opened his mouth. He did not expect that he and Dugucho would break the stalemate because of a horse. "Being fated to see such a divine steed today, I can't help but recall the horse I used to have." Dugucho's expression was melancholy. "I called it Reddy. Previously, I rode it to roam the martial world, enjoying myself in the mundane world. Finally, there came a day when my cultivation base had reached a certain height. Riding Reddy was much slower than when I used my movement skill. After trying for a long time, it still couldn't catch up to my two legs. Reddy began to feel dejected. It was probably from then on that it thought that it couldn't help me anymore. For a few years, Reddy ran with all its might, increasing its speed, wanting to be useful to me again. Finally, one day, it watched me fly into the sky, riding the wind. It watched me soar into the sky, standing on the peak of the mountain without moving for 3 days and 3 nights. For half a year after that, Reddy was inseparable from me. No matter where I went, it insisted on following me. Even when it couldn't keep up, it followed me. At that time, I actually started to get tired of Reddy following me, feeling like it was a burden. However, one day after half a year, when I woke up in the morning, I realized that Reddy was nowhere to be found. Since then, it never returned to my side. I thought about it for a long time and suddenly realized that Reddy couldn't bear to part with me. That was why it gave itself another half a year to be with me. Then, it left quietly. After that, I traveled all over the world, wanting to find Reddy, but I never found it again. Humans are so despicable. They don't know how to cherish what they have, and they regret it when they lose it. This is the biggest regret of my life, Dugu Cho said in a melancholic tone. This horse of yours, be it its color, its appearance, or its steed, it's almost the same as Reddy's. I almost thought that it was Reddy's descendant. Yunyang felt a sudden heaviness in his heart, and he sighed instinctively. Yunyang knew at once that Dugu Cho was destined to be disappointed. When he found Reddy, it was only a foal that was about to reach adulthood, while Dugu Cho's horse was at least 500 years ago. Judging by the time, it was impossible for Reddy to be Reddy's descendant. Even if it did possess Reddy's bloodline, who knew how many generations had passed? Yunyang, young Master Yun, I hope that you can promise this old man that you must treat it well, no matter when and where. Dugu Cho's gaze on Reddy was filled with tenderness as he said slowly, even if there comes a day when your cultivation base has reached a point where speed is no longer a limitation, don't hurt it. Yunyang was silent for a moment when he heard that before he answered solemnly, I promise you. If that day really comes, I'll ask for its opinion. Even if it can't ride with me anymore, it can stay in my home forever. My home will always be its home. I repeat once again, we're bosom buddies, not subordinates. Even if it can't keep up with my speed anymore, there's still my family, my wife, and my children who can keep it company. Yunyang said earnestly, if I can live to that day. Dugu Cho smiled in satisfaction. Well said. Your realm is 2 levels higher than mine. I'll remember that. Yunyang, you can call me Old Dugu now. Before Yunyang came, he had never expected to get to know Dugu Cho so smoothly. However, when he heard what Dugu Cho said at the end, Yunyang was shaken. Chapter 595. Old Dugu. You can just call me Old Dugu. Yunyang felt his heart skip a beat when he heard the words, his eyes reddening instantly. He was enveloped in a trembling emotion as he thought of the old man whom he had treated like a father. Thinking about it, he sucked in a deep breath and said hoarsely, I dare not. In my heart, Old Dugu can only be one person, but he can never be senior. Oh? Dugu Cho asked. Yunyang stood up and said, it's rare to have a joyous gathering with all the seniors here today. I've come with a purpose in mind. Everyone knows this, so there's no need to hide it. Fortunately, all of you didn't chase me away on the spot. I'm grateful for your hospitality. No matter what the outcome is, I won't let today's gathering down. He had gone from being cautious when facing the 4 experts to suddenly being bold. The drastic change in his emotions stunned the 4 men once again. They lifted their heads to look at him, their gazes filled with surprise. Yunyang smiled and said, since it's a joyous gathering, this junior should try his best. I'll cook a dish for all of you now, seniors, please have a taste. He spoke slowly with deep emotion, I'm ashamed to say this, but this is the only dish I know how to cook until now. However, it's also a lifelong signature dish that I'm confident I can serve. Ling Xiaozue could acutely feel that Yunyang's emotions were not quite right, so he interjected, what dish? Dare you call it a lifelong signature dish? Yunyang grinned. Cabbage and tofu. At this moment, he was smiling, but the 4 people around him all felt that his smile was even more miserable than a cry. Yunyang turned around and asked, Boss, do you have cabbage and tofu? A moment later. An indescribable aroma slowly permeated the room. The four men sniffed, surprise evident in their eyes. They did not expect this child to not be boasting. Just by smelling the aroma, they could already tell that the dish he had cooked was extraordinary. Although it was the most common home-cooked dish, it had indeed reached the pinnacle of home-cooked dishes. Not bad. Not bad at all. It's a lifelong signature dish indeed. Dugucho sniffed the aroma in the air and said, "Back in the day, my wife had a signature dish as well. I've eaten it my entire life, but I've never had enough of it. The reason this dish is a signature dish and it's delicious is that most famous chefs use their skills when they cook." Dugucho said softly, "However, people like my wife and Yun Yang use their hearts when they cook. To be able to eat such a dish in this lifetime. Good, very good." Dugucho told Ling Xiaozue, "Dugucho, Ling Xiao, this young brother of yours is really not bad. Whether it be to a horse or a person. You said that his arrival is an opportunity for everyone, and it's not a lie." Ling Xiaozue chuckled. "I thought you were going to beat him up." Dugucho guffawed. If he had remained the way he was when he first arrived, he wouldn't have been able to escape this beating. "Not only would I beat him up, I'd beat you up as well. But now..." He sniffed the aroma in the air that was growing thicker and said softly, "A small clue can reveal a big picture. Yun Yang is talented, but his outstanding looks are secondary. I'm more concerned about his feelings. He treats horses with sincerity, he treats people with sincerity. To be able to cook such an attentive dish, he must be someone who values his feelings to the extreme. Therefore, it can't be wrong. Moreover, the fact that he came to us shows that he's not inflexible and inflexible. In order to get to know the people he wants to know, he can even change himself. If I were to do evil, I would definitely become a hero of the world. If I were to do good, I would definitely become a Buddha. A very good young man." Dugucho's tone deepened as he said, "Very good." The corners of Ling Xiaozue's eyes were smiling as he said, "I've always thought that this young man is not bad." Feng Xianga smiled and said, "Not bad indeed." The skeleton-like man said, "Not only is it not bad, it's also very amazing." Amazing? The three of them turned to look at him. A young man who could be praised by the three of them could be considered one of a kind. It was a first for a young man to be praised by Dugucho. In spite of this, an even more extreme comment came from the man's mouth. Amazing. This comment was truly amazing. The skeleton-like man grinned, condensing his voice into 3 lines and sending it into the 3 men's ears. "Don't doubt my comment. What I said just now was rather reserved because the young man before me might be the most amazing person I've ever seen. You can't see how amazing he is because you're not me. That's all." Hearing this, Dugucho, Feng Xianga, and Ling Xiaozue paled in shock. Amazing. Can't see? Not me? There was actually someone in this world who dared to speak to the 3 of them like this. This was truly amazing. They really could not see it. Although the 4 of them were seated at the same table, drinking wine together, the reason for this outcome was only because of the current situation. It was because of the chi interaction between them that they felt that their cultivation base was similar. Even if there was a difference, it would not be huge. This was why the current conversation was held. The last person did not actually know any of the 3 men, but his words revealed his superior opinion. Ling Xiaozue and the other 2 men were the cream of the crop, the pinnacle of the world. How could they stand it? You say that we can't see it, but do you? Feng Xianga snorted and asked with a sideways glance. Of course, the skeleton-like man replied. May I ask who you are? Feng Xianga asked. The skeleton-like man sighed and said, the god of wine has served us wine and we've had a great time at the beginning. I thought you've guessed who I am. Turns out that you haven't. Feng Xianga frowned, speechless for a moment. Duguchou and Ling Xiaozui exchanged a glance, deep in thought. Duguchou had already vaguely guessed the identity of this skeleton-like man, but now he was even more certain of it. The skeleton-like man smiled faintly and poured himself a full bowl of wine. He finished it in one gulp and said softly, "A word from me can perhaps save you from certain death, but a word from him can." As he said this, his face suddenly twitched, revealing a look of extreme pain. Then, with a puff, he spat out a mouthful of blood. He turned his head at the right moment. The blood that he had spat out flew out like an arrow and into the darkness. But from the other side of the darkness, a scream suddenly came out. The scream was only halfway through before it stopped abruptly. It was as if someone was coincidentally there and had been hit by the mouthful of blood. The person only had time to scream, but before his voice echoed in the air, he was already dead. This time, Ling Xiaozui and the other two men were visibly shaken as they spoke in unison, "It's you. It's really you." Chapter 596. There are so many of us here, yet someone is still so interested in listening to what we have to say. The skeletal man chuckled and wiped away the blood stain at the corner of his lips. He stood up slowly and picked up a ladle of water to rinse his mouth carefully. Then, he walked back to sit down and said with a chuckle, "Of course it's me. It's me. Don't you never show your face?" Ling Xiaozui asked, "Why have you appeared before us in your true form this time? There must be a reason behind this." The skeletal man chuckled humorlessly. "It can be said that there is a reason behind this or that the world is unpredictable. It's a long story, but since I've appeared before you and Duguchou, of course, I'm looking for both of you to help me." Duguchou's expression turned serious as well. "May I ask what it is?" To be able to make this person run out to seek help and seek out both Duguchou and Ling Xiaozui, two of the world's acknowledged unrivaled experts, at the same time, one could imagine that this matter was anything but simple. "There's no hurry to ask for the both of your help. There's still room for it," the skeletal man said. "The most pressing matter now is to ask for Feng Xiang's help. I wanted to look for Cheng Jishe, but it's a pity that even I can't find him. Luckily, Feng Xiang can fulfill my wish as well." Feng Xiang chuckled and said, "What do you mean by that? Your initial intention is to seek Cheng Jishe, but your ultimate goal is to concoct the medicine. If I were to concoct the medicine, would you dare take it?" Feng Xiang was the god of wine, not the god of medicine. Finding a winemaker to concoct the medicine required the consumer to think carefully. Although Feng Xiang was a renowned physician, he was the phantom physician of wine and not the real, divine physician. The skeletal man said, "If it were Cheng Jishe, of course, would need to concoct the medicine. However, I said that you, Feng Xiang, can fulfill my wish as well because I only need you to concoct the wine for me." His expression turned unprecedentedly serious as he said, "I remember it clearly. There was a rumor back then that you were researching the soulless wine of 3 lives?" Feng Xiang's expression changed as he uttered word by word, "Why would you want to drink that wine?" The skeletal man sighed. "Someone planted a spirit of poison in me. I had no choice but to take the risk." Poison spirit. The three of them were shocked once again when they heard this, and they were no longer as calm and composed as before. More than 99% of the people in this world had never heard of these two words, but Feng Xiang and the other two were exceptions. Not only had they heard of it, not only did they know about it, but they also fully understood how terrifying it was. This guy in front of him had a poison spirit planted in him, and yet he was still sitting here alive and kicking. It was a miracle. Of course, taking into account this person's status, strength, background, and resources, nothing could harm him. Even if he was harmed by the poison spirit, he would still be able to make the best use of it. Otherwise, do you think I would look like this? The skeletal man sighed. I was also very handsome in the past, not to mention that the little guy just now wasn't bad either. Even if he was bad, it wouldn't be by much, but the attribute of the poison spirit is mystical. There's really no cure. Even with the soulless wine of 3 lives, it can only let you and the poison spirit perish together. It can't really cure you, so how can it help? Feng Xiang'e said, what's more, the wine is harmful to nature. After the poisoned person dies, the body will stiffen, invulnerable to weapons, water, and fire. Even if the body is placed on a high mountain and the spiritual qi of heaven and earth is used to dispel the evil, it can only last for 10 years at most. After 10 years, the entire mountain will turn into a wasteland. The qi of the earth won't recover even after 10,000 years. And in these 10,000 years, anyone who passes through this mountain will suffer varying degrees of poison damage. Until this mountain turns into a true poisonous mountain. Yet, you want to drink this wine, the soulless wine of 3 lives, doesn't belong in this world at all. Feng Xiang'e said, although I know the brewing method, I dare not try it. If I were to do it myself, I'm afraid I'd be poisoned to death before the wine is made. The skeletal person said, you know who I am, so of course you should know that what I say is true. It will come true. As long as you're willing to help, I have a way to help you brew this wine, said the skeletal person. What if I refuse to help? Feng Xiang'e's gaze was icy as he asked menacingly. You don't have to put on airs in front of me. You'll definitely help me. If you're not willing to help, I won't come to you. The skeletal person smiled. Feng Xiang'e's cold demeanor vanished as he groaned in pain. I really can't deal with a monster like you. Why did I come to Tiantang City? Why can't I be tempted? Dugu Chao's gaze was strange as he said, since you know everything, how can you be manipulated like this? Is it inevitable that fate plays tricks on people? The skeletal person chuckled. Yes, it's inevitable. Didn't you already know that your wife can't be with you forever back then? Why do you still want to get involved? Dugu Chao's face suddenly turned green. Fortunately, the skeleton-like person continued, Dugu, this is a predestined fate. No one can avoid this fate, it's the same for you and me. I can't avoid it, I can't abandon it, I can't leave it, I can't live, I can't die, I can't cry. The skeletal person heaved a long sigh. The other 3 sighed at the same time as well. It was only a few dozen words, but it was enough to fill one's heart with endless emotions. Especially when one had reached their level, listening to these words filled their hearts with mixed emotions. After talking about me, let's talk about the rest of you. Today's meeting is a fortuitous encounter, so I should give you a few words of advice. The skeletal person looked at Ling Xiaozui and said, Ling Xiaozui, I've come with a request. There's something I need to do, but you can't do it alone. Ling Xiaozui nodded with a bitter smile. The skeletal person looked at Dugu Chou and said, Old Dugu, you too. You've come with a request as well, so you need someone's help even more. Dugu Chou nodded faintly. As for you, Feng Xiang'e, you're not here to find trouble with Supreme Cloud. The skeletal person turned to look at Feng Xiang'e and said, you've come with a request as well, so you need help. Feng Xiang'e seemed to want to say something, but the words did not leave his lips. He sighed and lowered his head. There's no need to sigh. I'm just the pot calling the kettle black. I've come with a request as well. The skeletal person chuckled and recited slowly like a song, life is full of hardships, who can have no requests? The muscles on Dugu Chao's face twitched suddenly. Gritting his teeth, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes, drinking it all in one gulp. This was because the 2 lines that the skeletal person had said were the opening lines of a song. This song was called, I Have a Request, and it corresponded to everyone's concerns. Back then, Dugu Chao's wife had loved to sing this song the most. Now that he heard someone sing it again, Dugu Chou felt a sourness in his heart, like the crashing waves of the ocean. For a moment, a multitude of emotions welled up within him, the bitterness indescribable. Life is full of hardships. Who can have no requests? Dugu Cho chuckled, tapping his chopsticks against his wine bowl as he sang along. Life is full of hardships, who can have no worries? Looking at success and failure, the world turns white, drinking a cup of bitter wine, the years flow east, sighing at the chaos of the world, love has its end, crying, a general, a marquis is but a mound, calling me brother, when did we turn against each other, looking at the road ahead under your feet, when did your hand disappear from my palm, who can have no requests? Who can have no worries? I have a request, I ask that beauties never grow old, and heroes never worry. I have a request, I ask that the world is full of flowers. I have a request, I ask that I stay with you for all eternity. I have a request, I ask that the world's love never changes. You and I depend on each other, until, 1,000 years later. Chapter 597. To be fair, Dugu Cho did not have a good voice and he sang like a sister. However, everyone present could hear that he was exceptionally attentive and engrossed in his performance. His low, raspy voice evoked a sense of melancholy in those who heard it. As the skeletal man listened, he gathered all his thoughts into a long, gloomy sigh. Ling Xiaozue looked exceptionally dejected as well, while Feng Xiang'e closed his eyes and listened attentively, one of his hands tapping lightly on his thighs, a look of reminiscence on his face. His head of white hair fluttered in the night breeze, solemn and solemn. For a moment, the four influential figures who had long stood at the pinnacle of the world were lost in their own thoughts. The room was filled with desolation. Legendary figures like them had far more experience than ordinary people. Who among them could achieve such accomplishments in this lifetime? Who among them did not have an unforgettable past? Now that time had passed, the past was like a puff of smoke. Hundreds of years of time had turned to dust. What would it feel like to sing the song that one's true love loved the most at this very moment? Where were the beauties who had once been so affectionate to each other? Those peerless beauties that once lingered endlessly, had long been battered by the wind and the rain. Now, the splendor was gone. Only 4 old men were left, sitting and drinking. Although they were already standing high above the clouds, overlooking the world, was there anyone by their side? The path of Tao was arduous and difficult. Loneliness was to be expected, but when it came to it, it was hard to describe the sorrow. Yunyang stood at the kitchen door, looking at the 4 of them and could not help sighing inwardly. He could not help thinking, if I were to be like them in a few decades, a few centuries, would I be just like them, reminiscing about Jiuling Feng? That feeling. The skeleton-like person sighed deeply, and then finally raised his head and took a deep breath. He then flipped his wrist and took out a purple jade flute. He held it in his hand and put it to his lips. The faint sound of the flute sobbed like a sob. It was near yet far, barely audible, but it went straight into the depths of one's heart. By the time Yunyang sat down again, the singing had already faded away and the flute had already finished its last note. There were only soft sighs in his ears. It seemed that everyone present had gone through a cycle of reincarnation because of this song and this flute. This is your signature dish, Chinese cabbage and tofu. Dugu Cho picked up a mouthful of food, his expression growing more despondent. He sighed softly after drinking a bowl of wine. Not bad, not bad. This is Chinese cabbage and tofu indeed. Ling Xiaozue and the rest were silent as well, sighing as they drank. Dugu Cho ate a few mouthfuls of food and was suddenly lost in thought. Then, he looked at the skeletal man solemnly. The man smiled and said, "Do you have any other requests?" Dugu Cho sucked in a deep breath and said, "I want to ask you a question. Can you answer me directly?" "Ask away." "I'll do my best," the skeletal man replied. Dugu Cho enunciated each word clearly. "Can I still see her?" Everyone was stunned by Dugu Cho's question. Everyone, including Yunyang, knew very well who the she that Dugu Cho was referring to was. She had been dead for hundreds of years. How could he still see her? Even if reincarnation did exist, hundreds of years had passed. Who knew how many lifetimes she had been reincarnated for? Unexpectedly, the skeleton-like monster was silent for a long time, and did not speak for a long time. The more silent he was, the brighter Dugu Chao's eyes shone. The fact that the other party did not reject him directly but was musing meant that there was hope and a chance. As long as there was a possibility, it was better than anything else. Ling Xiaozui and the rest could not help feeling nervous as well, their gazes fixed on the skeletal man. Yun Yang, on the other hand, held his breath, feeling his heart thumping in his chest. If there was still a chance to meet someone who had been dead for a long time, did it not mean that he still had a chance to see old Dugu again? Yun Yang really wanted to meet this old man who was like a father to tell him that his son, his seventh brother, might not be dead yet and was still in this world, his elder brothers, it's better not to see each other. Why should we meet again? The skeletal man sighed. This life is over. Dugu Cho was unwilling to give up. I know you must have a way. Tell me, how can I see her again? No matter what the method is, as long as it can be realized, I'll owe you a favor. The skeletal man was silent for a long time before he said, Sigh, I'm hesitant because I know there's only one way, but this method, you won't be able to do it. You might not be able to do it. He sighed and said, Actually, in the hundreds of millions of years under this starry sky, there have been no more than 10 people who have been able to do this since the beginning of time. Dugu Cho perked up again and said, I am grateful to know the method. Please show me the way. Dugu Cho. I shall be eternally grateful for your kindness. The skeletal man sighed softly and said, Fine, let me tell you a story first. Everyone immediately pricked up their ears. They all knew that this story was no small matter and could not be compared to ordinary legends. Yun Yang was especially focused, afraid that he would miss the slightest detail. Who knows how many years ago, under this starry sky, there was an unparalleled expert. I can't say his name. He had reached the pinnacle of the world he came from. He had a long lifespan and was almost immortal. However, his lover had a short life. Before he mastered his mystical art, she had already left the world. Their love was deep and their fate was shallow. This person and his lover were deeply in love. They were in so much pain that they wished they were dead. He tried everything he could to revive his lover so that they could reunite in this world. When he reached this point, everyone's eyes lit up like torches. Revive. Although his strength had reached the pinnacle of the world and he could look down on the world with disdain, his cultivation base alone was of no help in this matter. He put up a bounty and spread it across the world in search of a feasible method, but he didn't find anything even after a long time. He didn't know what to do. He refused to give up and continued to search bitterly. Many years later, he finally met someone. That person probably pitied him and took pity on his infatuation. That person told him, when his cultivation base continued to break through, one day, when he could break through the limits of this starry sky, then he would be able to resurrect his lover. Hearing this, Yun Yang and the other three looked up at the sky at the same time, gazing at the boundless night sky. There were countless stars in the night sky, blinking and twinkling in a place far away. Break through the limit of this starry sky. Yun Yang mumbled in his heart. The skeletal man continued to narrate, because of this thought, this person really began to work towards this goal. He kept breaking through his realm, cultivating as if he was draining his life force. Then, he kept on fighting and honing himself. However, he was already one of the strongest experts in the world to begin with. Even after he improved, he discovered that he was already invincible in the world. However, he still couldn't even leave this continent, let alone the limits of the distant starry sky. He didn't give up, so he began to search for a way to break through this continent. He tried to create his own cultivation method to break through the original limit. Finally, one day, he succeeded in shattering the void and ascended to a higher level. However, when he ascended to a new world, he was shocked to realize that his cultivation base hadn't really reached the pinnacle because there were plenty of experts who were stronger than him in the new world. He had only broken through the world he was born in, but it was still far from it. There were too many experts here, and he was still in the same place after all. He didn't break through the limit of the starry sky, therefore, he began to cultivate again. He kept on fighting, kept on breaking through, kept on honing himself, only moving towards that one goal, moving forward without stopping. At this point, the skeleton-like monster paused. What happened after that? Dugucho felt his throat go dry, his voice so hoarse that he could barely hear himself. Finally, he reached an amazing state. With a punch, he could shatter the stars. With a roar, he could turn the sun and moon invisible. With a wave of his hand, he could maintain it for countless years without dissipating. The skeletal man said, "There's no need to doubt or be surprised, because at that time, he was already in existence who had already comprehended the law of Tao. It was also when he reached that level that he defied the laws of nature and returned to his original continent with his own power. Then, he began to turn back time." Chapter 598. Listening to this, everyone sucked in a cold breath without exception. Only Yun Yang's gaze was brighter, his face flushed with excitement. In the end, he saw the person he loved the most, when she was 19 years old. He took his lover and broke the shackles that this world had placed on her, transcending the rules and soared into the sky. Because, moreover, by using the rules of his great Tao, his lover can also accompany him for eternal life, until the end of time. The skeletal man said softly, "Legend has it that he reversed the time of that world by hundreds of thousands of years." He lifted his head and looked at Dugucho. "If you can be like him and cultivate the rules of Tao to achieve this, you can see her again." But the meaning behind his words was clear. Even though Dugucho was at the pinnacle of this world, he was a rare cultivator in the last 1,000 years, but he could not be compared to that legendary person. The saying that it was impossible to achieve was not a lie. Feng Xiang'a sighed in melancholy. Lowering his head, he picked up a wine pot and gulped it down. Ling Xiaozue was still seated calmly, an inexplicable agitation surging on his face. Sword intent flowed through him, almost bursting into the clouds. Dugucho turned around abruptly to look at Ling Xiaozue, his eyes gleaming. Faintly, he enunciated each word clearly, "Ling Xiaozue. If there's a day where I can really get drunk with you, how about that?" Ling Xiaozue's green robes fluttered despite the absence of wind as he replied softly, "As you wish." It was obvious that Feng Xiang'a was not the oldest among those present, but he was already the oldest among those who could hardly progress further in their cultivation journey. His lifespan was approaching its end as well. Therefore, Feng Xiang'a could already be declared hopeless in advance if he wanted to go that far. In spite of this, Dugucho and Ling Xiaozue were still at their pinnacle, and they still had a long way to go. If they could achieve another breakthrough, they could extend their lifespans considerably. It was not impossible even if it meant that they would have an endless lifespan again. Therefore, despite knowing that the road ahead was treacherous and filled with thorns, the two of them were still full of ambition, aiming for the Tao. The skeletal man looked at Dugucho and then at Ling Xiaozue before lowering his head and calculating silently with his fingers. After a while, he lifted his head to look at Yun Yang in surprise before lowering his head again to calculate in silence. "Have you calculated anything?" asked Ling Xiaozue. "So what if I have? No matter what I've calculated, it can't be said." The skeletal man heaved a long sigh, but he still said softly, "Both of you are fortunate to have met a benefactor who has allowed your path to continue. Dugu and Ling Xiaozue both have the chance to advance in their cultivation, but you'll have to plan in how your future will be and how it will be. One wrong step and you will be gone forever." Dugucho and Ling Xiaozue frowned and asked at the same time, "Please enlighten us." The skeletal man said, the journey of the Tao emphasizes primarily on fate. In everyone's life, there will be a benefactor who will appear to help and protect you. As long as you don't miss the opportunity and find this benefactor and pay the price that you should, there's hope for success. What's left is just hard work, not giving up, and working hard at all costs. Success will be achieved. However, if you can't find the benefactor or if you found the wrong one, then the opportunity will be gone and you'll have nowhere to go. Opportunity? A benefactor's help. Dugu Chou and Ling Xiaozue were deep in thought. The skeletal man turned to look at Yun Yang again, a gentle but terrifying smile on his skinny face as he said, "Young brother Yun Yang, may I ask what request you have?" Yun Yang thought about it carefully and said, "I only want to ask if I want someone to resurrect someone as well, is it the same?" The skeletal man flashed a strange smile and said, "It's the same, but it's also different." His words baffled all four of them. Dugu Chou, Ling Xiaozue, and Yun Yang asked at the same time, "How is it the same? How is it different?" The skeletal man answered, I can't say it. I'll understand it when the time comes." The three of them had their own thoughts, and they seemed to be deep in thought. Dugu Chou's gaze on Yun Yang was rather odd. He said, "Young brother Yun is so young. Could it be that you have such regrets?" Yun Yang rubbed his nose and said, "Even if there are no immediate worries, I'm afraid of having distant concerns. I don't have them now, but it's better to be prepared in advance just in case I get flustered." "That's not the truth." "Forget it if you don't want to say it," Dugu Chou said with a roll of his eyes. "Ha ha ha." Ling Xiaozue chortled. Yun Yang chuckled as well and said, "Regarding this extremely arduous method of resurrection, I do have an idea. If this method is executed successfully, the first condition is to live forever. Only with an endless lifespan can there be hope of reaching the end of Tao. Naturally, there must be conditions. Take Senior Dugu and Big Brother Ling for example. Both of them have the foundation, especially Big Brother Ling. His body and mind are at their peak." Dugu Chou stared at Yun Yang with an amused gaze and chuckled, saying, "What about your Big Brother Ling? Are you saying that my body and mind aren't at their peak? I just think that when one always looks old, even if one insists that one's heart isn't old, no one will believe it. Then, one's heart will definitely age as well." Yun Yang said seriously, "If that's the case, Senior Dugu must first prove that his heart has changed at his peak. At the very least, he must restore his appearance to that of when he was young. Only then will it be passable." Ling Xiaozue guffawed even louder. Dugu Chou chuckled as well. As he laughed, his face and figure underwent a shocking transformation that was visible to the naked eye. Yun Yang's eyes widened as he watched Dugu Chou slowly turn from an old man to a younger, more muscular, and taller man at a speed visible to the naked eye. His grayish-white hair slowly turned black, completely black, pitch black, and jet black. His face, which was full of wrinkles, also gradually smoothed out. His face became smooth and glossy, his stooped body also slowly straightened up, almost there. Almost there. Ling Xiaozue stopped him quickly. Dugu Chou smiled and stopped cultivating. His appearance had already turned into that of a middle-aged man in his 30s. He said with a smile, "How about this?" The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched. "I was just saying that, but you actually came out with a person who had a big change. Do you have to be so amazing? Not just a disguise, but even plastic surgery isn't as exaggerated as this. The way you look now is just right." Ling Xiaozue looked at him and said, "If you continue to look younger, I'm afraid you'll have countless romantic debts. A beauty's heart is easily hurt." "How can I bear to do that?" the group guffawed. The skeleton-like man chortled as well. "Everyone has their own desires. There are distant goals, there are nearby goals as well. Why don't we talk about them and see if there's anything we can help each other with? It's a win-win situation. Dugu Cho said, actually, I didn't expect to meet Feng Xianga or Ling Xiaozue when I came out this time. Of course, I didn't expect to meet you either. I only wanted to come out and move my limbs, to fight, to train. To find a few opponents to practice with. Everything that happened so far is an unexpected gain, but it's fate. Yun Yang's eyes shone when he heard the man's words. He said respectfully, Senior Dugu's wish is too easy to fulfill. I dare not say much about other things in Tiantang City, but there are too many experts here. As the host, this junior is willing to help senior find opponents. Ling Xiaozue looked at him meaningfully, thinking to himself, this child finally knows how to talk. I thought you were going to say, as long as you're by my side, I guarantee that you'll have endless battles to fight and endless experts to fight against. Actually, Yun Yang had intended to say that, but he swallowed the words when they were at the tip of his tongue, adding a few more layers of foreshadowing. Of course, the true meaning was still the same. It's really a coincidence that I came here to join in the fun. I came here because I had nothing better to do. Ling Xiaozue looked at Yun Yang leisurely and said faintly, now that Dugu is here, it saves me a lot of trouble. Yun Yang was touched by the gesture. Yun Yang did not believe that Ling Xiaozue, with his carefree nature, had taken the initiative to step into this whirlpool during such a time of crisis. Yun Yang did not believe that he had come for Yun Yang. Now, in Tiantang City, Ling Xiaozue was probably the only person who could be remembered by Ling Xiaozue. I'm here to look for help. The skeleton-like person said, I'm also here to look for fighters. I've found 3 at once, but now I've found 3. It's a great destiny, a great opportunity. Chapter 599. Feng Xiang sighed and said, one of my original intentions is to look for Supreme Cloud. Of course, the main goal is to find a successor. I don't have much time left in my life, I have to pass down the wine that I've kept for my entire life. I value this legacy very much. Yun Yang's gaze flickered as he listened to Feng Xiang, but he did not show it on his face. He was Supreme Cloud, the culprit who had stirred up trouble in the empire of Zio in the name of the god of wine. As one of Feng Xiang's 2 main targets for his reappearance, he had his own considerations. However, Feng Xiang's target was actually his wine and his legacy? Ling Xiaozue glanced at Yun Yang from the corner of his eyes, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. The more they conversed, the more congenial they became. Yun Yang, on the other hand, did not interrupt much, acting as a qualified listener. After all, he was a junior with limited abilities. It was already a great opportunity for him to be able to sit with these 4 people. If he were to continue speaking nonsense, he would be overconfident and overestimating his own capabilities. In spite of it, Yun Yang felt like laughing as he listened to the 4 men's conversation. The 4 of them took turns to complain, one after the other. Who would have thought that everyone at the pinnacle of this world would have their own sore spots, things that they could not accomplish? It did not match their status as legends and myths. I can see it now. When these peerless experts gather together, their aura is similar. It's not much different from ordinary people gathering together. They don't pretend to be profound and show their true nature. But if I were to see it with my own eyes, it would be hard to imagine that the common people's imagination of peerless experts being together should be so otherworldly and so on. It's actually completely different from what they imagined. Yun Yang watched as the 4 old men chattered excitedly, spittle flying everywhere. Occasionally, they would argue with each other with flushed faces and necks, and he found it oddly amusing. But it had to be said that relationships between people were often built up in such a short period of time. No matter how powerful the legendary master was, the top of the world was no exception. Everything was the same. The fastest dish on the table was none other than Yun Yang's Chinese cabbage and tofu. A large wok's worth was swiftly devoured by the 4 of them, Yun Yang did not even manage to get a few pieces. Not only that, the four old men were shamelessly forcing Yun Yang to make another walk, as if they would teach him a lesson if he did not do it. Yun Yang was speechless and helpless about this. He was here to make friends, all right? He had not even told them his purpose and they were forcing him to be their chef. Was this really all right? Just as he was about to argue, his butt was kicked a few times and his head was knocked a few times. He finally understood that the situation was more powerful than he was. Since he was powerless and helpless, he could only obediently do as he was told. It was not that Yun Yang did not have a sudden thought, if I were to secretly spit in there, these four old men might not even notice. Won't they be eating my saliva then? However, this tempting idea was just a thought. He really didn't have the guts to put it into action. If he were to be found out, the beating was secondary, the most important thing was his life. When the second wok of Chinese cabbage and tofu was served, Yun Yang raised his chopsticks quickly, intending to take a few more bites. He did not expect the four old men beside him to have a slight change in their expressions. At the same time, an oppressive force that was as heavy as a mountain loomed over him. Not only did the oppressive force come abruptly and without warning, but it was also incredibly strong. If Yun Yang had faced it alone, he might have been crushed to death. Even if he was lucky enough not to die, it was inevitable that he would be severely injured. Ling Xiaozui straightened his body slightly, his aura suddenly radiating with a powerful aura, shielding Yun Yang within his aura as he faced the sudden oppressive force head-on. His gaze was like two sharp arrows as he looked towards the other side of the darkness. Almost at the same time, Dugucho lifted his head slowly as well, his expression unusually solemn. The skeletal man poured a goblet of wine and said faintly, "They're here. The ones who are looking for trouble with me are here." Before his words echoed in the air, two powerful auras had already appeared in the night sky far away. The aura that any one of the two silhouettes exuded was no weaker than any one of the four who were seated right now. One of the auras suddenly paused and stopped far away, while the other still maintained the monstrous aura that it had when it first appeared, as if it could crush everything in its path. It was as if this person did not take the four peerless experts in front of him, the pinnacle of the world, seriously at all. The insolence and arrogance that came with it could be clearly felt. Dugucho and Ling Xiaozui snorted coldly at the same time. The next moment, time and space froze as if even the air had stopped flowing. In the night sky, a silhouette appeared abruptly. 100 feet in front of the group, a man dressed in black stood tall with his arms behind his back. He was tall and imposing, looking down on the rest. His eyes were like the stars in the sky, overlooking the four men coldly. The newcomer was dressed in black and had black hair. His black hair hung down like a waterfall, following his cheeks all the way to his chest. He just stood there, but in the darkness, he was exceptionally conspicuous. At a glance, it was impossible to miss him. Even the sky seemed to have darkened because of his arrival. "Brother Gu, come back with me." The man in black in the sky looked at the skeletal man faintly and said softly, "You've come out to play once. It's about time. It's good for both you and others to stop." The skeletal man smiled and said, "Brother Nian, why do you have to force yourself?" The man in black in the sky said with a smile, "I don't want to force myself either. However, the truth is unpredictable. This is my position, I have no choice but to do it. But what surprises me the most is, how did you get out?" The skeletal man smiled and said, "I remember telling you that if the time comes, I can leave if I want to. You can't stop me. You won't even know it. Just like you said, you've done it." The man in black sighed softly. "Brother Gu, you do have an unfathomable ability." The skeletal man said, "If that's the case, why don't we go our separate ways? Everyone will be happy." The man in black shook his head slightly and smiled. "If we go our separate ways, it's only Brother Gu's happiness, but it's a great disadvantage for me. After all, he extended a hand and said, Brother Gu, your tea is still with me. It's not cold yet. Come back with me, we can enjoy the tea together and laugh at the world. That's a happy ending for both of us. Chapter 600. The man in black's gaze turned as sharp as a blade as he said, Oh, is that so? It's a pity that I don't quite believe you now. Where there's a will, there's a way. Man can conquer nature. This is the truth. If I want to do it, I can do it. Brother Gu, are you really unwilling to leave with me? Dugu Cho suddenly stood up and hollered, Who are you? Don't you think you're standing too high up there and spouting nonsense? The man glanced at Dugu Cho with interest and said, I'm standing high so that I can see further. Dugu Cho, you've retreated from the world for so long. Now that you've reappeared, you're sitting so low. It's destined that you won't be able to see further. Dugu Cho smiled faintly. Is that so? Is that really the case? The man in black answered seriously, Yes. There's a reason why I'm standing high. It's because I've always been at such a height that I can overlook the masses. Dugu, you've been accompanying your wife for too long, so long that you don't know the many changes in the world. Let me give you a piece of advice. Since you've decided to retreat from the world for love, don't act recklessly and stir up trouble in the martial world. It's not a problem to come out for a walk. Leave your wife alone in that valley, won't she be even lonelier? He looked at Dugu Cho with a smile and said, If you don't heed my advice and insist on wandering like this, I'm afraid that your wife won't be lonely there. Dugu Cho's pupils shrunk. Are you implying that you want to send me down to accompany her? The man in black smiled but did not speak. The meaning behind his words was clear. How arrogant! Dugu Cho snorted. Tell me your name. The man in black said faintly, I'm from the Four Seasons Tower. My surname is Nian. A loud boom resounded. Yunyang felt as if a bomb had suddenly exploded in his head. I'm from the Four Seasons Tower. My surname is Nian. The Four Seasons Tower, Mr. Nian. Today, at this very moment, I've finally met this person, this nemesis, this irreconcilable enmity. Nian. No wonder he was neither humble nor arrogant when faced with the four experts. He was still as arrogant and confident as ever. The highest leader of the Four Seasons Tower naturally had the confidence to do so. On the other side, Ling Xiaozue looked at the man in black in the sky with a strange gaze and said faintly, Mr. Nian, why do you have to be so overbearing? Are you really not going to come down and greet your old friend? Mr. Nian stood in the air with his arms behind his back. His gaze was fixed on Ling Xiaozue. No wonder Gu Chaoyang is so resolute. He has two unrivaled experts backing him up. Not bad at all. Dugu Cho, Ling Xiaozue, with the two of you, we can indeed go against any force in this world. His words were tough, but he had some misgivings in his heart. He was already prepared to leave and not enter Tiantang City. However, he unexpectedly discovered that Heaven's Inquisition, which he had imprisoned for a long time, had actually escaped from that secret place. He had even come to Tiantang City. This was too important to Mr. Nian and the Four Seasons Tower. Right now, even though he knew that there were four top-notch experts in front of him, he could not show any signs of weakness. No matter what, he had to capture this fellow and bring him back. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. If they fought, they would have to face Ling Xiaozue and Dugu Cho. However, now that things had come to this, it was impossible for him to lower his voice. He might as well be tough to the end. Dugu Cho said faintly, but you think that our strength is not enough, don't you? Mr. Nian said, I, Nian, have never looked down on myself, but I don't have the confidence to say that I can face both of you at the same time. If both of you want to be safe, no force in this world will be able to shake you. However, why do both of you want to go against the Four Seasons Tower? Even if both of you are peerless in this world, when it comes to going against the Four Seasons Tower, I don't think it's a good feeling. Ling Xiaozue said, it's not like I haven't tried it in the past. I'm still living a carefree life now. Thinking about it, what's the harm in trying it one more time? Now that I have Brother Dugu's help, the one who should be troubled is the Four Seasons Tower, am I right? Mr. Nian smiled and said, you, Ling Xiaozue, are still the old Ling Xiaozue, but the Four Seasons Tower now is no longer the Four Seasons Tower of the past. If both of you are in the mood, the Four Seasons Tower will certainly entertain you. We won't disappoint both of you. His words were extremely blunt, and he didn't conceal the intent to threaten Chen Shi at all. It could be said to be extremely blunt, and it was no different from challenging Chen Shi to a duel. Ling Xiaozue's expression darkened. One of his hands slowly reached for the hilt of his sword, his aura surging. Unexpectedly, Dugu Chou had already stood up before him. He sucked in a deep breath and said, Ling Xiao, the Four Seasons Tower is an old rival of yours. It's hard to imagine anything new. This is my first time, however. Let me do this. Ling Xiaozue sat down slowly and said with a smile, since you're going to do it, why would I be needed? Not only will there be fine wine and delicacies today, there will also be a stunning sword dance to witness. Dugu Chou chuckled and extended his right hand slowly. Halfway through, the sword that was initially on his back suddenly hummed and fell into his hand with a glint. Having not appeared in this world for hundreds of years, the world has forgotten what kind of person Dugu Chou is. Dugu Chou uttered word by word, I have to remind the world that Dugu Chou's sword can still kill. He lifted his head to look at Mr. Nian who was in the air. Two beams of sword intent shot out from his eyes, illuminating the entire night sky. Mr. Nian stood with his arms behind his back, his gaze meeting Dugu Chou's. 4 pairs of eyes collided in the air. It was only a meeting of eyes, but a loud boom reverberated in the air. Was this a joke? How could such a thing happen? A mere gaze could produce such a shocking impact. If it had been directed at someone with a slightly weaker cultivation base, would it not have killed him with a single glance? It was the real deal that could kill people with a gaze. In the next moment, Dugu Chou had already disappeared from the side of the table. Mr. Nian, who was in the air, let out a long laugh. Great! I'm about to test the astounding might of the former Heaven Leaderboard expert. 2 silhouettes soared into the sky like dragons soaring into the sky. In the process of their ascent, a blinding flash of sword light bloomed in the air like a thunderstorm. Dull clangs of collision rang out incessantly. In just a short moment, both of them had exchanged countless blows, punches, and kicks. With another loud boom, both of them were flung backward in the air due to the immense impact. Just as their retreating shadows were reflected in the eyes of the people below, they were entangled once more in the next moment. Loud clangs rang incessantly in the air. Yun Yang strained his eyes to watch, unwilling to miss even the slightest detail of such an earth-shattering battle. Only by understanding the limits of Mr. Nian's ability as much as possible could his revenge plan succeed. Dugu Chou was obviously one of the few people in this world who was qualified to trigger Mr. Nian's full combat power. Yun Yang watched as the sword light flashed and split into 3 like magic. They were 3 identical swords, and all 3 swords, without exception, were exuding a startling sword light as they slashed out. At that moment, the surrounding air was sucked in by the 3 swords, completely sealed off. Great swords! Mr. Nian laughed and countered with all his might, not daring to be careless. He said, Dugu Chou, you've enjoyed being looked up to by the world for so many years. It's been too much. So what if you were the Heaven Leaderboard's number 1 back then? Now, you don't even have a Heaven Leaderboard anymore. You're destined to be overthrown by the waves behind you. Since you don't know when to stop, this reputed one shall teach you a lesson today. Chapter 601. Dugu Cho did not say a word. His expression was cold and his gaze steady. He was neither impatient nor impatient. His sword light was neither too fast nor too late, but it rolled out like a great river, forming waves of sword light in the air. It was truly like the waves of the sea, each wave taller than the one before it surged towards Mr. Nyen. The billowing white waves tumbled and surged in waves and rose. Mr. Nyen's body kept shifting in the air to deal with them, bobbing up and down like a small boat that could be drowned in the waves of sword light at any time. Yunyang was overjoyed to see the situation, thinking that Dugu Cho lived up to his reputation. Even with the 3 swords encirclement, the sword light was still so dense. By the looks of it, Mr. Nyen was at a complete disadvantage and could be overturned by the sword waves at any time. In spite of this, Yunyang could not help but feel doubtful. He had caught a glimpse of Mr. Nyen from afar before. Back then, Mr. Nyen had made a stunning appearance and killed Lei Dongtian and his servant with ease. It was a magnificent sight, yet he was at a disadvantage right from the start. Had he been overestimating Mr. Nyen's capability all along, or was Dugu Cho too powerful? The answer was then revealed. Dugu Cho, you'd better draw out your grieving sword quickly. Mr. Nyen hollered, don't tell me you think this trick of deceiving a child can do anything to me. Dugu Cho chuckled faintly. You want me to use the grieving sword? You don't deserve it. With another loud crash, the sword light that was initially dense and orderly in the sky scattered like a meteor explosion. Mr. Nyen was flung away like a kite with a broken string, but he quickly returned to his original position. What followed was a punch that seemed to push the universe along with heaven and earth. It came crashing down from the sky with overwhelming force. Yunyang was a little dumbfounded. Could it be that the earlier scene was merely a test? Dugu Cho had not even executed his ultimate skill, while Mr. Nyen had managed to avoid the danger and was not tested at all? However, the trick to deceive a child was a little too sophisticated. Wait, if this goes on, am I not the child who was deceived? The battle between the two grew more intense. Dugu Cho's sword light surged upward, colliding with the fist. Mr. Nyen grunted, his robes fluttering in the wind. His long hair billowed into the air as he was buffeted by the impact. Dugu Cho did not gain too much of an advantage either. With a grunt, he dropped 30 feet down, unable to give chase immediately. In the next moment, both of them charged in the opposite direction once more. Suddenly, a silver ball of light formed in the air. Both of them were within it, exchanging blows with incredible speed. From below, it was impossible to tell which of them was Dugu Cho and which was Mr. Nyen. The more Yunyang watched from below, the colder he felt. His palms were drenched in cold sweat. To think that Mr. Nyen was so powerful. It turned out that this was the pinnacle battle of the present age. He couldn't even see such a battle clearly. Each strike of Dugu Cho's sword seemed to come from nothing. It was an empty space, but as Dugu Cho's sword pierced towards it, Mr. Nyen happened to appear at the same spot the moment the sword light arrived. His response was impeccable, as if they had discussed it beforehand. Neither of them made a single mistake when it came to predicting such a battle. Any form, method, or technique was destined to be useless in the face of such a terrifying battle. At this level, the only thing that mattered was ability, cultivation base, foundation, perseverance, and perseverance. And a little bit of luck. Yunyang had to admit through gritted teeth that the battle before him had exceeded his current knowledge. Ling Xiaozui's expression gradually turned grim as he said faintly, I thought that my cultivation base had improved tremendously after the fortuitous encounter and that I would be invincible in this world. I didn't expect Mr. Nyen's cultivation base to have improved so tremendously as well. Compared to when we fought back then, it's at least 3 levels higher. Feng Xianga looked up and said, however, Dugu Cho is indeed the heaven leaderboard number 1 back then. He hasn't fallen into a disadvantageous position. Ling Xiaozue shook his head lightly. No, Dugu Chou is gradually falling into a disadvantageous position. Mr. Nian's techniques are both offensive and defensive, seamless and flawless. It's the best against Dugu's dense sword force. Unless Dugu uses his grieving sword to split heaven and earth apart, there's still a chance of turning the situation around. However, if the grieving sword isn't used, not only is it impossible for him to defeat the other, he might even lose. Yun Yang sucked in a cold breath. What about you, Brother Ling? Ling Xiaozue calculated in silence and said, the cultivation base of the three of us is more or less on par. However, if it's purely based on the depth of our cultivation base, Mr. Nian is already a level higher than us by some unknown means. Although this level is minuscule, it shouldn't have appeared. Ling Xiaozue frowned. There's no reason for his cultivation progress to be so fast. Back then, his cultivation base was still slightly lower than mine. I've been cultivating diligently all these years and have advanced sufficiently. Coupled with the previous encounter, my cultivation base has improved tremendously. Even if he cultivated diligently like me and had the help of heaven and earth treasures, he would at most be on par with me. It's impossible for him to be so much faster than me. The only explanation is that the Four Seasons Tower must have some other method to aid in cultivation base. Ling Xiaozue said, I can even be certain that this Mr. Nian in the air isn't the Mr. Nian who fought with me back then. These are two different people. If it was the Mr. Nian who fought with me back then, he would be strict and unhurried. He wouldn't be so impulsive and hot-tempered. Furthermore, they will only target me first, not Dugu Chou. If that's the case, who is Mr. Nian? The real Mr. Nian. Which one is he? Ling Xiaozue sucked in a deep breath, his expression extremely grim. The sound of explosions in the air grew more rapid, like firecrackers exploding ceaselessly. The outcome is about to be decided. Ling Xiaozue sighed softly. An expert was indeed an expert. Before Ling Xiaozue's words echoed in the air, the battle of the century had already come to an end. The crowd could only feel a tragic aura suddenly appearing in the sky and spreading at a high speed. It made one feel that they were the only one left in the vast world. Everyone had left them. The desolation, loneliness, and desolation, it made people feel as if all their hopes had been turned to dust. There was nothing left to live for. Following the rise of this deathly stillness, the entire world was shrouded in this tragic atmosphere. Even the stars and moon in the sky seemed to be weeping because of it. It was in such an atmosphere that a tear-inducing sword light flew up like a rainbow. It was like an immortal who had lost his lover, dancing in the air in agony. Every bit of the aura was heartbreaking. This was the so-called unparalleled dance of the sword. The grieving sword. Finally, Dugu Chou had unleashed his trump card. The Supreme's chief scriptwriter is here. He'll be staying here for more than 10 days. I'll entertain him first tonight. Don't worry, I won't drink, cough, tragedy, the revision has been added again, and it has been revised once more. I usually edit my draft after I'm done, but I'm afraid that I won't be able to tell, so I use the word revision to edit it so that I can clearly see where the mistakes are. Chapter 602. As Dugu Chou's grieving sword unfolded abruptly, the situation in the field changed drastically. Sword light filled the sky, but there was also a sense of melancholy. Most of Tiantang City and countless people felt heartfelt sorrow at this moment. It was an indescribable desolation. Yun Yang, who was watching the battle from a close distance, was the first to bear the brunt of it. He was young, but the grief, anger, and resentment in his heart were comparable to anyone in this world. He was overwhelmed with emotions, feeling shaken and unable to control himself. He actually had the thought of returning to the afterlife that he no longer had anything left to live for. A single thought was followed by thousands of others. Yun Yang, who was disturbed by his inner demon, looked uncertain, his aura fluctuating violently. He could be devoured by his inner demon at any time and fall into a state of qi deviation. Roar! Ling Xiaozui saw the unusual changes in Yun Yang's expression. How could he not know that he could not take it? He let out a clear cry in time to snap Yun Yang out of it. With Ling Xiaozui's help, Yun Yang was jolted awake from his inner demon's bite. When he focused his attention on the battle in the sky again, all he could see was a dark curtain. There was no life, only sorrow and desolation that shrouded the sky. Other than that, there was no other sound. Has the battle ended? Yun Yang was in slight disbelief. This is heaven's grieving and earth's grieving. Ling Xiaozui said, this is Dugu Chao's unique aura. Combined with his sword intent, he has trapped Mr. Nian inside. I see. So, Senior Dugu has turned the tables? This is Dugu Chao's unique technique, an invincible one. Even if Mr. Nian's cultivation base is slightly higher than Dugu Chao's, he'll still die here if he can't break out of the heavens grieving and earth's grieving in a breath. Ling Xiaozui's eyes were bright as he looked at the sky, his gaze cold and sharp. He should be able to come out. Yun Yang shook his head. Mr. Nian won't die just like this. If he dies, who am I going to seek revenge from? This person's life can only end in my hands. I didn't expect you to think so too. Ling Xiaozui looked at Yun Yang in surprise and said, I think so too. Although Mr. Nian is trapped, he won't die here. Dugu Chao's undefeated record will probably end today. The corners of Yun Yang's lips twitched, thinking to himself that they were thinking of two different things. Putting aside the irreconcilable grudge and the desire to kill him, I do not know how much I wish for Mr. Nian to be finished as soon as possible, for his bones to be ground into ashes and for him to die a graveless death. At this time, the sound of heavy strikes could be heard from within the black curtain. After a moment of stalemate, suddenly, a loud and long roar broke through the vast black curtain and soared into the sky. The black curtain also suddenly exploded. Rays of mighty sword light, like the eruption of a volcano, rushed out from the black curtain in an unending stream. For a moment, the entire sky was illuminated by the sword light, making it as bright as day. A figure with long hair fluttering in the wind, accompanied by a spurt of blood, instantly rushed up to 1,000 feet high in the sky. He shouted, "The grieving sword is indeed extraordinary. Heaven and earth are miserable, it is indeed terrifying. Dugu Chou, you live up to your reputation. I shall return the gift of this sword today in the future." The curtain exploded. Dugu Chou stood tall in the sky and sneered, "The next time we meet, you won't be as lucky as you are today." According to normal circumstances, or the normal rules of the martial world, since Mr. Nian had admitted his inferiority and was already high up in the sky, he should be leaving. Unexpectedly, before Dugu Chao's reply echoed in the air, Mr. Nian let out a long roar and hollered, "The mountains are high and the rivers are long, we shall meet again." Although he had said that the mountains were high and the rivers were long and the rivers were long and the rivers were long, he was charging down like a sharp arrow. His hand stretched out to grab Gu Chaoyang. At the same time, another terrifying aura descended. It was another figure hidden in the darkness in the distance. He suddenly appeared. He was dressed in black, and even his face was shrouded in the loose black robe. He was like a black light flashing past a crack, approaching at an extremely fast speed. The majestic aura was like a mountain crashing down from the sky. Mr. Nian's action was already extremely abrupt and unexpected, but the other black silhouette's action was even more terrifying. The approaching black silhouette stretched out a hand and shook its sleeve. A humongous hand materialized out of thin air, grabbing at Gu Chaoyang with an unstoppable force. One person descended from the sky, while the other swept over. Both the top and bottom were moving at an extremely fast speed. Their determination to win was clear and unshakable. Ling Xiaozui, who was closest to Gu Chaoyang and had the highest cultivation base, reacted the fastest. With a clear roar, a dazzling sword light exploded in his hand without warning. At the same time, his body that was initially as steady as a mountain left dozens of shadows in the air. Each shadow had a sword light gleaming in their hands as the sword light shot out in all directions. Dugucho, who was in the air, did not let his guard down, following suit. For a moment, the two great swordsmen attacked with all their might, targeting Mr. Nian and the other black silhouette. "I've been waiting for you." Ling Xiaozui's cold voice rang. His sword light was boundless and unstoppable, forcefully intercepting the black silhouette coming from the ground. Almost at the same time, Feng Xiang'e moved as well. With a grasp and a wave, a pot of wine exploded in his hand. The wine that sprayed into the air turned into sparkling flying blades that danced in the air like a rain of light. Gu Chaoyang guffawed. "You're still unwilling to give up even now. Should I say that I'm extremely honored?" A wave of purple soared into the air as his voice rang. It was the purple jade flute in his hand. All of the above, although it took a long time to describe, had actually happened at almost the same time. Indeed, in this short span of time, 6 pinnacle experts in this world had attacked with all their might. The result of 6 pinnacle experts attacking at the same time was extreme. With a loud explosion, a black silhouette somersaulted with a laugh and soared into the sky, disappearing without a trace. As for the black silhouette that was charging over, it had expanded due to the counterattack of Ling Xiaozui and the other 2 men, exploding without any room for resistance. However, a hand, a long, slender arm that was as smooth as jade, appeared unexpectedly and stretched out. How long could a person's hand be, even with the addition of an arm? To an ordinary person's knowledge, it did not seem to be very long. However, the arm that had appeared out of nowhere had completely overturned the world's understanding in this aspect. As it stretched out, the arm seemed to be able to stretch endlessly. With a loud smack, it struck Yun Yang's chest. Although Yun Yang's ability was the weakest among those present, far from being on par with the rest of them, a cultivator's intuition towards impending danger had already sensed it the moment the arm stretched out. He reacted immediately and with a loud cry, his saber came slashing down. It was a pity that the large hand had completely ignored Yun Yang's saber, passing through the saber light and landing squarely on Yun Yang's chest. Bam, 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 after 4 consecutive thuds, the black-robed man soared into the sky. "Ling Xiaozui, if you still want your young brother's life, bring Gu Chaoyang and come to Spirit Breeze Mountain within 3 days to exchange with me." Ling Xiaozui and the other 3 men were even more enraged. They attacked with all their might, their aura even stronger than before. Suddenly, a thick cloud of smoke billowed from the black-robed man, covering the entire sky in an instant. Hundreds of bangs rang out in the thick fog. With a hoarse laugh, the black silhouette had already escaped into the sky. Even when Dugucho and Ling Xiaozui's sword light were in pursuit, they could no longer catch up to the silhouette in the sky, for the latter had already vanished mysteriously. No one in this world can counter the cycle of 4 seasons palm. Ha ha ha. Chapter 603. There was no one in the air anymore, but a long laugh rang in the air as a pool of blood fell to the ground. It was obvious that it was the blood that the man in black had spat out during his escape. The blood that he had spat out was different in nature from the blood that came from wounds caused by weapons. It was apparent that although the man in black who had appeared later was exceptionally capable, he could not match the combined attack of 4 experts of the same level. He had been injured in the end. However, the outcome was not that the other party was at a disadvantage. In fact, there were only 2 of them while they had Ling Xiaozui, Feng Xiang'e, Dugucho, and Gu Chaoyang, for legendary masters. Yet, the other party could still strike and retreat in one piece. Before he retreated, he had even injured Yun Yang. Not only was his cultivation earth-shattering, but his battle accomplishments were even more shocking, terrifying, and shocking to the ears. It was also at this moment that the dark clouds in the sky suddenly dispersed, revealing a huge hole that was 100 miles wide. The clear night sky and the bright moon were revealed. It was the shockwave of the 6 experts' power that had just soared into the sky, but it was enough to shatter the clouds in the sky. Ling Xiaozui and Dugu Chou floated down from the sky at the same time, their expressions solemn. "Why aren't we giving chase?" Feng Xiang'e was rather displeased. "We won't be able to catch up." Both of them shook their heads at the same time, their expressions grim. Exchanging glances, they saw the shock in each other's eyes and were even more astonished. They did not expect the Four Seasons Tower to have such top experts and unparalleled experts other than Mr. Nian. It was just that the cultivation base of the two people who had appeared here was not weaker than both of them. If all the Four Seasons Tower's experts had come, how high would their overall combat power be? How high would it be? The Four Seasons Tower. Dugu Chao's eyes were burning with fighting spirit. "I won't have to worry about being lonely in this martial world anymore." Ling Xiaozui had already landed in front of Yun Yang. "Young brother, how are you?" Yun Yang looked at his chest in slight confusion. After cultivating for a moment, he murmured, I don't seem to feel anything." "What cycle of 4 seasons palm?" That black shadow's hand had clearly slapped his chest 4 times. The cycle of 4 seasons palm was frighteningly powerful, but he didn't feel anything at this moment. Yun Yang was utterly bewildered. That kind of peerless master wouldn't do it just to greet him, right? Especially those last threatening words, how could they be empty words? However, he didn't even feel the slightest tremor, nor did he feel any pain. This matter was really strange. Ling Xiaozui's expression changed as he heard the man's words. He grabbed Yun Yang's hand and sent a surge of refined energy into Yun Yang's body, inspecting his limbs and bones, meridians, and all the hidden parts of his physical body. There was nothing that he could not see. However, after a long time, his expression became more and more strange. Dugu Chou came to Yun Yang's side as well and asked in a low voice, "The rumored cycle of 4 seasons palm is incomparably vicious. No matter what cultivation base the victim has, the victim will only have 4 days to live. How is young brother doing now?" The essence of the cycle of 4 seasons palm is to categorize the victim's life into 4 stages, like condensing the 4 seasons into 4 days. The first day is spring, equivalent to a person's youth, the qi and meridians are clear and strong. The second day is the prime of one's life, the pulse is long. However, when it comes to the third day, the sun gradually sets in the west. When it comes to the fourth day, the victim grows old and his life comes to an end. In the end, everything returns to nothingness. The winter season is a symbol of death. Feng Xiang'e came over as well. He was known as the phantom physician god of wine, so naturally, he had his own expertise in the art of healing. He observed Yun Yang's expression carefully. Only Gu Chaoyang was unfazed, not at all anxious. He said faintly, "What a waste of a table full of good food and wine. It's hard to have such a feast in this lifetime." He sighed and went around to look for wine jars that had not been knocked over. Dugu Chao's expression slowly turned odd as well. No matter how many times he checked, he could not find any signs of Yun Yang's body being affected. The 3 of them, Yun Yang, Dugu Chou, and Ling Xiaozui, were all looking at Feng Xiang'e in bewilderment. After all, Feng Xiang'e was the relative expert in this field among the people present. They obviously did not know as much as Feng Xiang'e when it came to injuries and the cycle of 4 seasons palm. Feng Xiang'e grabbed Yun Yang's hands, then his left hand, then his right, then his right, then his right, then his right for Yun Yang to undo his shirt. Finally, an odd expression similar to that of Ling Xiaozui and the rest appeared on his face. His eyes were wide open as he murmured, what is going on? Is it really just a bluff? Isn't this too strange? The three experts looked at each other, perplexed. Everyone had seen it clearly just now. The black-robed man had risked his injuries to force his way out of the encirclement and seized the opportunity to slap Yunyang 4 times. His threat was still ringing in everyone's ears, it was definitely not fake. The effects of these 4 strikes were obvious. They must be extremely vicious and difficult to cure. His motive for doing so was obvious, as one could well imagine. Yunyang was Ling Xiaozui's little brother and he cared for this little brother dearly. He might even owe Yunyang a huge favor due to certain circumstances. That was why he had injured Yunyang with a unique skill that no one could save, forcing Ling Xiaozui to trade Gu Chaoyang for the cure. Whether Ling Xiaozui made the trade or not, he would feel terrible. At the very least, he could plant a dangerous knot in Gu Chaoyang's heart. In such a situation, a gap might appear in this powerful alliance. Everyone present could think of the motive. It was because they could think of it that they could not understand Yunyang's condition. After multiple observations, the 3 of them had come to the same conclusion: Yunyang was not injured at all. What was more, Yunyang himself agreed with this conclusion. Hence, the 4 of them were at a loss. This did not seem to be explainable. They had made such a bold move, not hesitating to suffer the backlash from the combined attack of the world's top 3 experts and sustaining injuries to obtain this opportunity. They had even left when the other party thought that he had everything under control. Yet, in the end, none of their tricks had been used on Yunyang. Was this not the strangest thing in the world? Chapter 604. Yunyang, as one of the parties involved, do you feel anything strange? Feel free to tell me if there's anything wrong, uncomfortable. Ling Xiaozui was rather nervous. Ling Xiaozui could not help but feel nervous. What kind of person was Mr. Nian? How could the palm strike that he had plotted and was determined to succeed be taken lightly? What was more, the cycle of 4 seasons palm was a cycle of 1 palm strike. Yunyang had been struck 4 times and was on the brink of death. Without a skilled cultivator's profound cultivation base to prolong his life, he would have died at any time. Otherwise, how could he further weaken his side's overall capability? Yunyang was unusually puzzled about this as well. If Ling Xiaozui could think of it, how could he, as the supreme thinker, not think of it as well? In spite of this, the reality was that he had cultivated carefully and checked his body repeatedly, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. As one of the parties involved, Yunyang had felt an inexplicable force invading his body forcefully the moment he was struck. At that moment, Yunyang felt a sense of hopelessness. My life is over. Mr. Nian must have seen through my true identity. However, after that moment of despair, there was no more feeling, not even the slightest bit needed to be said. In particular, that strange and inexplicable sinister power had completely disappeared without a trace. What was going on? Yunyang was perplexed. Gu Chaoyang raised his head and drank a pot of wine, saying, "It said that heaven blesses the kind. I've escaped another disaster. Looks like you brothers don't have to tie me up to exchange for the antidote anymore. Spirit Breeze Mountain in 3 days. TSK, how frightening." Dugu Cho asked, "Are you sure you're all right? Could there be some other hidden injuries?" Dugu Cho asked. Ling Xiaozui and Feng Xiang'e looked at each other, speechless. What Dugu Cho had said was what they were thinking and what they would not like to see. After a while, Feng Xiang'e could not help scratching his head and said, "This is the first time I've seen something like this in my life. It's unbelievable." He furrowed his brows and said, "Little brother Yun's current state is as if he's not injured at all. Although it seems inconceivable, it's also his best state. You may not know this, but this is not the first time I've seen the 4 seasons reincarnation palm. This technique can be considered the most vicious technique in the martial world. Back then, I had personally seen a person who was struck by this technique. According to the description of the person who was struck by this technique, the first day after he was struck by this technique, he was refreshed and radiant. However, from the second day onwards, the signs of rapid aging gradually appeared. When that person came to me for help, it was already the third day. However, no matter what I did, there was no way to stop his aging. In the end, I could only watch as the person who was struck by this technique deteriorated and died like rotten wood. Although that person's cultivation base was still a distance away from mine, he was still a high cultivation base in the Tao realm. He was definitely not someone ordinary. In the process of the rescue, I've checked the victim's physical condition many times. The part of the victim's body that was struck would have a tree-like growth ring. One day, only one day, but it would reach the outline of 50 years. 2 days would be the outline of 200 years. 3 days later, it would be the sign of complete decay. But none of these signs have appeared on little brother Yun. Feng Xiang frowned as he pondered. Does this mean that he's fine? Ling Xiaozui asked. We can't be blindly optimistic. Feng Xiang said, even if he looks fine now, he might not be completely fine. The person who I saved that day didn't come to me on the first day he was struck. The specific situation was only relayed by the victim, so it's hard to say for sure. I'm only afraid that after midnight, if the growth ring suddenly appears on this little brother, then, he's been struck. Just as he finished his words, he subconsciously glanced at Gu Chaoyang who was drinking leisurely. If his concern came true and the situation continued to worsen, whether to exchange Gu Chaoyang for the cure or not would be a difficult decision to make. If we're considering this, why don't we? Du Gu Cho said faintly, let Gu Chaoyang gauge little brother Yun's fortune directly. Even if he can't say it directly, there's still a limit to whether or not his life is in danger. Ling Xiaozui and Feng Xiang's eyes shone when they heard him. Only the both of them truly understood how astounding Gu Chaoyang's calculation skill was. It was a skill that could definitely decipher heaven's will. However, legend had it that Heaven's Inquisition had almost never told anyone's fortune or measured anyone's fortune in his entire life. Heaven's will was unpredictable. A person's life and fortune belonged to Heaven's will. Prying into it recklessly would result in divine retribution. Even if one had the ability to calculate Heaven's will, he would still be restricted and might even suffer a backlash. Gu Chaoyang snorted and strolled over slowly. With a frown, he said, if he's fine, then he's fine. What's the point of testing? This is superfluous, superfluous. Ling Xiaozui said faintly, it's best that you do this for a while. Otherwise, I'll kidnap you and exchange you for it. I'm not willing to take the risk. Gu Chaoyang clenched his teeth. Perhaps he would not take it to heart if someone else had said it, but since it was Ling Xiaozui who had said it, it could not be taken lightly. He could really kidnap him and bring him there. The child in front of him had a huge karmic connection with him. Be it emotional or logical, he would not take the risk. Gu Chaoyang sighed, looking at Yun Yang helplessly. He actually wanted to say, there's no need to look at this child's fate at all. Nothing will happen to him. This is destiny. Destiny, do you know that? However, if he were to say so, he would at least be beaten up first. You haven't F***king looked at anything, yet you're saying it like that, aren't you asking for a beating? How is it destiny? You're being so perfunctory and perfunctory. Do you have a guilty conscience? Do you want to die and be shameless? This young Master Yun's life is very tough. It's too tough. Looking at Yun Yang's physiognomy, Gu Chaoyang sucked in a breath and said, it's like being a lifelong virgin who's been tough to death. It's secondary that he gets stronger when he meets the strong, he doesn't die when he meets the strong, he turns misfortune into fortune when he meets it. There are countless obstacles in his life, but he can always turn them into safety, turning misfortune into fortune. He can even receive endless help in his encounters. Such a fate, unless it's a giant beyond this galaxy, can be shaken? To put it simply, the future is bound to be a smooth and bumpy road. There's no need to be mindful of the bumps in front of us. As for the recent fortune, it's only a temporary setback when a trapped dragon is about to break free. When the time comes, the wind and clouds will converge and the help from all sides will be unobstructed. As long as you're careful, there's no need to worry about anything. Ling Xiaozui said angrily, I think you're asking for it. Who do you think you're bluffing? You were talking about the limit of the galaxy just now and now you're talking about beyond it. Can you be any more ridiculous? Do you really think I dare not capture you? Also, what do you mean by a smooth and bumpy road? What nonsense are you spouting? Gu Chaoyang said angrily, what else can I say if I'm not bluffing at this juncture? His physiognomy. What do you King know? In his exasperation, he actually cursed directly, like a different person from his previous magnanimous self. Gu Chaoyang was truly frustrated. How could Yun Yang's fortune be so easily spoken about? If I were to King say it, I'd probably be struck by a bolt of lightning the moment I opened my mouth. Would you be responsible? Chapter 605. Ling Xiaozui's expression lightened slightly. Hearing Gu Chaoyang's words, he could confirm that Yun Yang was indeed fine. Everything else was not important. While he was relieved, he was also filled with endless bewilderment. Mr. Nian's earth-shattering arrival had turned out to be a mishap in the end. Wasn't this too much of a joke? How could he not be a son? Yun Yang had a guess in his heart. Was it because of the endless divine art that he did not show any signs of being hit? Or was it because of Emmy? However, why hadn't such a situation occurred before? In the past, when he faced off against He Hanqing, he couldn't help but suffer heavy injuries and almost lost his life. The danger wasn't inferior to today's in the slightest. Why didn't a similar situation occur? This was really thought-provoking and extremely puzzling. His guess was right. If Mr. Nian had executed the art with brute force, Yun Yang would have become a pile of minced meat by now. However, Yun Yang was naturally immune to such an insidious art. The endless divine art, as the name suggested, was endlessly multiplying. No matter how the 4 seasons changed, the endless divine art would never stop growing. It would not affect him at all. The reason was that the endless divine art could destroy the insidious force of the endless divine art. There's no such thing as death. Mr. Nian only knew that Gu Chaoyang was extremely useful to him now, so he could only threaten him in this manner. If he had known that Yun Yang was Supreme Cloud, he would never have done so. It was a pity that he did not know. Since we're sure that young brother Yun is fine, we can study the Spirit Breeze Mountain 3 days later. We can beat him at his own game. Ling Xiaozui's gaze was gleaming as he said, everyone, if we don't set up a trap, it seems like we're letting down the 2 uninvited guests today. The other 3 men perked up when they heard him. Good idea. Let's do this and this. Ling Xiaozui said, I think we can at least cut off an arm of the 4 Seasons Tower. The trio cheered in unison. Yun Yang heaved a sigh of relief and said, brothers, you've finished talking about the important matters. Shouldn't you bring up the trivial matters as well? It's a little too shabby for the 4 of you to still stay in this inn. As the host, this young brother feels very apologetic. Why don't all of you stay in my residence? What do you think? Gu Chaoyang was the first to respond, all right, all right. It's too dangerous to stay here. The royal residence is safer and more comfortable. Ling Xiaozui looked at Gu Chaoyang strangely. Why had this Sir Heaven's Inquisition, who was said to be omniscient and capable, been behaving so strangely since his appearance. This should be the first time he and Yun-yang had met. They had not known each other and had never met before. Besides, Yun-yang was still a junior after all. Why would Heaven's Inquisition, who had intimidated the entire world, be so cautious? However, the reality was that ever since this Heaven's Inquisition had met Yun-yang, he had agreed to whatever Yun-yang said. No matter what Yun-yang did, he would agree to it. Thinking deeper, his evaluation of Yun-yang just now could not be any higher. All of this was indescribably strange. What did this guy mean? Could it be any more melodramatic? A strange thought suddenly popped into Ling Xiaozui's mind. According to the conversation between Heaven's Inquisition and Mr. Nian, Heaven's Inquisition was once imprisoned and tortured by Mr. Nian. However, if we were to say that they were close friends and then fell out due to some reason, it would fit the current situation. It's not impossible that Heaven's Inquisition was originally from the Four Seasons Tower. But it doesn't look like it. Feng Xiang frowned and said, staying in the royal residence. I'm afraid it will be inconvenient. He was from the Empire of Zio after all. The original intention of this trip was to provoke Yutong's guardian, Supreme Cloud. Even if his original intention was no longer there, staying in the residence of the Empire of Yutong's King Xiaoyao abruptly was still a little uncomfortable. Gu Chaoyang said, "You've already decided to give up on finding Supreme Cloud. Why do you still need to care about anything else? What inconvenience is there? It's obviously a great convenience. I say, old Feng, you've never enjoyed the life of a noble before. It's so comfortable. It's so comfortable. If you don't experience it, you'll never know that there are such pleasures in this world. You're old, the soil has already been buried to your chin. If you don't take advantage of your last moments to enjoy yourself, wouldn't it be a waste to come to this world? Let's go, let's go." Feng Xiang huffed and glared at him, his beard twitching in anger. Why am I buried to my chin? I don't have much time left in my life, but I still have at least a few decades to spend. How? How can you say that? It doesn't matter where I go, said Duguchou. With Ling Xiaozui and Gu Chaoyang's approval, Duguchou's reply was equivalent to agreeing to stay in Yun-Yang's house. Feng Xiang's hesitation was no longer important. There was no more meaning to it. Yun-Yang was overjoyed. Moving these four immortals to his house would truly be a relief. He would no longer have to fear the Four Seasons Tower's unpredictable ability. He beamed with joy and said, "Great, great. Let's go then. This young brother will take good care of all of you when I get home." At midnight that same day, Yun-Yang quietly brought the four masters to the residence of Yun. He could finally breathe a sigh of relief after arranging for them to stay in one of the courtyards. After all, the status of these four Buddhas was too high. It was inevitable that they would cause a huge commotion when they moved during the day. It was best to move in the middle of the night to avoid detection. Of course, Yun-Yang's intention to conceal his own force was also part of the plan. With these four people in charge, how could it be possible that no one would come to attack him? He had to make the best use of his resources and talents. Initially, I only wanted to see if I could build a relationship and borrow their strength to facilitate my future plans. Even if it's hard to borrow their strength, I still have to find out the reason they came to Tiantang City so that there won't be any complaints when I shift the blame to someone else. I didn't expect to bring them home directly. It's unexpectedly perfect. Yun-Yang planned in his heart. Duguchou stood in the courtyard and took a deep breath, saying, "The air here, the spiritual qi seems to be more abundant than other places." "Yes, much more abundant." Ling Xiaozui said, "That's right. Even if it's a rather famous holy land of cultivation, it's probably nothing more than this. Cultivating here is not only beneficial, it's also twice the result with half the effort." Feng Xiang'a and Gu Chaoyang had gone to their rooms to discuss some private matters, leaving only the two of them to look at the living environment. One should not assume that sophisticated cultivators had no requirements for the living environment. In fact, sophisticated cultivators' requirements for the living environment were much higher than ordinary people's. A residence with relatively dense spiritual qi was the first requirement, so seclusion deep in the mountains was usually the first choice. This was because the more populated a place was, the thinner the spiritual qi was. Secondly, it would be better if there were all sorts of spiritual ingredients in the diet. The so-called spiritual ingredients were, of course, the ingredients that Yun Zuyu had used to entertain Yun Yang the other day. Chapter 606. Of course, to fulfill these requirements, it had to be built on an extremely rich material foundation. If one did not have an extremely high financial capability, it would be a myth to create a spiritual atmosphere that was like a sacred cultivation ground in a secular gathering place like Tiantang City. Ling Xiao, what is your relationship with this young Master Yun? This question had been bothering Dugu Chou for the entire night. A very, very good relationship. Ling Xiaozui smiled. Don't you think this young man is very pleasing to the eye? I won't be stingy with him. Dugu Chou nodded. This young fellow Yun Yang is quite a nice person indeed, but he's not to the point where you and I have to lower ourselves to befriend him. I want to hear the truth. Be straightforward. Ling Xiaozui chuckled. If you haven't experienced his benefits personally, all arguments are just empty words. I believe that after spending some time with him, you'll understand that being friends with him isn't just an opportunity for him. I hope so, Dugu Chou replied faintly. How are your injuries? Ling Xiaozui asked. It's fine. Dugu Chou chuckled dryly. I've only suppressed a breath of sword energy, nothing else. The other party has the ability to force me to use the grieving sword. How can I remain unscathed in such a situation? Ling Xiaozui nodded lightly. Be careful. Don't be careless. Dugu Chou was obviously unconcerned as he said, how can I not understand this? It's just that Mr. Nian's ability has exceeded my expectations, but it's not to the extent where he can truly hurt me. It's fine indeed. As he spoke, his gaze suddenly froze. What is that? As he suddenly stretched out his hand, a tyrannical force was released, and a little white cat that was originally lying on the roof was pulled into his hand. The little cat meowed and bared its teeth. It turned around angrily and struggled with all its might, but it could not break free. Dugu Chou held the kitten in his palm, marveling as he studied it. Look at this, Ling Xiao. This little thing's camouflage is really impressive. I only noticed it when it sneaked all the way to our rooftop. This is amazing. Dugu Chou sighed. As he spoke, he suddenly fell silent. His eyes widened as he exclaimed in surprise, Ling Xiao, this isn't a cat. Rubbing the palm-sized thing in his hand, he lifted it up and looked at it. Ling Xiaozui sighed with a smile, wondering how long it had been since Dugu Chou had appeared. It took him so long to distinguish a cat. How could he not recognize it just by listening to its voice? Meow, 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 does your tiger meow like that? Besides, a tiger wouldn't be that small. He could only move closer to take a look. With a single glance, he couldn't help but widen his eyes in astonishment. This is an eclipse panther? But how can an eclipse panther cub be so strong? The little fellow struggled pitifully in Dugu Chou's palm, but under the restraint of Dugu Chou's overwhelming power, he could not even change his form, let alone escape. He could only lift his head to look at Ling Xiaozui, his gaze pitiful and pitiful. It was a pitiful sight. At this time, a white figure suddenly appeared, and a cold voice sounded, Who are you? Hurry up and put down Big White. It was Bai Yixue. Under the moonlight, Bai Yixue stood tall in his snow-white robe. His brows were slanted, and his demeanor was dazzling. His gaze was eerie. With a hand on the hilt of his sword, he glared at the duo coldly, his desire to fight brimming. If it were not for the fact that they were in the residence of Yun and Bai Yixue knew that the other party was not an outsider, he might have already drawn his sword and attacked. This little fellow was Big White. Every night, this fellow would return to the residence of Yun from Nanan's place to reunite with his brothers. It was just that during this period of time, Big Whitey was not only anxious but also anxious. He did not know when Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 would return. Worried about them, Big Whitey came back even more frequently. Who would have thought that as soon as he came back tonight, before he could even land, he would be caught by someone? This was something that had never happened before. Big White growled inwardly, "Your father wasn't even on guard and you caught me? This is my home, that's why I was so unguarded. Put me down if you have the guts, and we'll start again." It was a pity that Dugu Cho could not understand a single word no matter how it called out to him. Even if he could, Dugu Cho might not have done so. The outcome had already been decided, there was no need to try again. Although the Eclipse Panther cub before him possessed extraordinary abilities, it was not enough to catch the attention of people like Dugu Cho and Ling Xiaozue. Being surprised was already the limit. Even if one was completely alert and gave it his all, the outcome would not be any different when faced with an absolute difference in ability. What if I don't let go? What do you dare to do? Dugu Cho asked, looking at Bai Yixue with interest. Don't let go. Before Bai Yixue could speak, someone said, "If you don't let go, you'll have to ask this young master if I agree to it or not." As he said this, he saw a guy with a body full of lush green color walk over with swaying steps. Dugu Cho was even more intrigued as he chuckled, "Who are you then?" "This young master is." Just as the person walked over, he was halfway through his sentence when he saw Ling Xiaozue. With an instinctive yelp, he turned to leave, mumbling, "Why did you come here to pee? Where's the toilet?" As he mumbled, he ran as fast as he could like he was being chased by a dog. In the blink of an eye, he was long gone. Dugu Cho was speechless for a moment. Could it be that this fellow was a psychopath? It was already eye-catching to be dressed in green, and his tone was so arrogant. Yet, he had turned to run without finishing his sentence. Was his excuse too lousy? Peeing? You came to the middle of the yard to look for the toilet in the middle of the night? Is your toilet in the middle of the yard? He was simply making irresponsible remarks that were unreasonable. A strange smile hung on the corners of Ling Xiaozue's lips. Wasn't this the child from whom he had bumped into the other day? It was rare that he still remembered me. His memory wasn't bad at all. Dong Tianling had almost peed his pants in fright as he hurried along the way. He felt his scalp prickle and chills run down his spine, the soles of his feet were numb as well. The last time he had met this fellow, he had almost peed his pants. This time, it was the same fellow who had almost peed his pants again. It was 2F** King dangerous. I realize that I've been going against these top-notch experts all my life, encountering them one after another. Dong Tianling shuddered. He had not thought of coming out to pee this time, but the fright had made him feel the urge to pee. He felt that he would really be doomed if he had been any later. Chapter 607. Dong Tianling was speaking the truth. Ever since he had befriended Yun Yang, he had met quite a number of pinnacle experts like Ling Xiaozue, Lei Dongtian, the Four Seasons Tower's four venerable lords, and Dugu Cho, whom he had met today. His encounters were rare. What was more, although these people had scared Dong Tianling to the point of wetting his pants, he had never actually done so. His character was not something an ordinary person could compare to. Bai Yixue still did not feel much about it. He only looked at the direction Dong Tianling had left in disdain, thinking to himself that this fellow had no sense of brotherhood at all. Did he have to be so scared? With me, Yutong's unrivaled expert, what else is there to be afraid of? Could Ling Xiaozue, Dugu Chou, or Jun Moyan be among these two fellows? Definitely not Jun Moyan. I know Jun Moyan, I've even fought him before. Let go of Big Whitey. Bai Yixue said coldly, seeing that you are my guests, I won't go too far. However, a guest must have his duty as a guest. Little Whitey is my young master's pet, how can he be toyed with? Watching Big Whitey struggle in Dugu Chou's grasp, Bai Yixue's heart ached. Back when the 5 Whiteys had been playing around at home, it had been so lively. However, Whitey 2 and Whitey 3 had gone out with their young master and gone missing after the incident. It was no longer as grand as it used to be. Now, all that could be heard was mewling, filled with sorrow and sorrow. The sound of yearning was clearly felt by Bai Yixue and the others as well, as if they were experiencing it themselves. Everyone in the residence of Yun could not wait to feel sorry for the 3 Whiteys. Now, one of them had been caught by this fellow and was being played with. Although they were in their own home, Bai Yixue was already fuming with rage as he watched Big Whitey's aggrieved state. Dugu Chou chuckled and said, "It's not difficult for me to let it go." "What do you want?" Bai Yixue asked angrily. Dugu Chou replied, amused, "As long as you win me, I'll let it go." "How about that?" Bai Yixue laughed in spite of his exasperation. "You'd better think this through, lest you lose all your reputation and face." To Bai Yixue, even if the other party could capture Big Whitey, his cultivation base must be impressive, but Big Whitey had always been defenseless in its own home. It would not be difficult for a Heaven Realm cultivator to do so. Most importantly, Bai Yixue had a breakthrough in his own cultivation base. He was now at the pinnacle of the 8th Heaven Realm and could step into the 9th Heaven at any time. He was a superb expert, the top expert in Tiantang City. He was not even afraid of Jun Moyan. How could he be afraid of him? Moreover, Dugu Chou had already returned to his natural state. His essence was contained within him, so nothing could be seen, even his aura was hidden. How could Bai Yixue see through it with his current cultivation base? Dugu Chou said seriously, "I've thought it through. What's the value of a reputation? If I can get defeated, then it's worth it." Bai Yixue guffawed. Suddenly, he straightened himself, becoming as sharp as a sword as he recited slowly, "Who is the one dressed in white? A divine sword beheaded the souls of the dead, who in the world knew him? Only white snow can be seen in the world." With a long howl, he pulled his sword out of its scabbard in a suave manner. With a dragon's roar, a sword glowed brilliantly in Bai Yixue's hand. Then, Bai Yixue sprung up gracefully from the ground, leaving a trail of dashing afterimages in the air. Like a dashing tree in the wind, his tall form charged over like an immortal taking a stroll. Swoosh! Bai Yixue's sword turned into fluttering snow that rained down from the sky. Dugu Chou pulled his sword out of its scabbard as if he was facing a formidable foe. His expression was unusually grim as he cried out, "Great swordsmanship!" Bai Yixue was growing increasingly convinced that his opponent was not much of a threat. He hollered, "Experts know who's better in a battle of experts. Don't waste your effort. Put Big Whitey down quickly. I won't make things difficult for you, lest we hurt each other." Although he said that he would not make things difficult for him, he bent his body and stabbed 19 times consecutively. His suave form had already circled Dugu Chou 7 to 8 times. Ling Xiaozue was speechless. Why had he never heard that Dugu Chou had such a hobby? Playing with cats and dogs was secondary, but now he was toying with people as well, and he was so serious about it. Could he be any more shameless? In the circle, Bai Yixue, whose robes were whiter than snow, moved freely like a dragon. A strike to the east, a strike to the west, 3 strikes to the south, and 5 strikes to the north, he performed his sword skills to his heart's content. Dugu Chou, on the other hand, was struggling to cope. He looked like he was struggling to hold on, as if he would be defeated at any time and admit defeat on the spot. The more Bai Yixue fought, the more delighted he felt. With a long howl, he hollered, still not admitting defeat? Do you really want this big brother to beat you down? That's not how I treat my guest. Dugu Cho was still holding Big Whitey in one hand while he held his sword in the other, parrying and defending with all his might. It looked like he was not strong enough, but he could still find the time to reply, a man can be killed but not humiliated. Defeat me if you can. Good man. You have guts. Bai Yixue praised loudly and said proudly, just because of your guts, I won't let you get hurt as long as you call me big brother. Dugu Cho shut his mouth right away and did not speak anymore. Just like that, the two of them continued to fight. Yun Yang had just settled Feng Xianga and Gu Chaoyang down when he heard the commotion outside. He ran out to have a look, and his jaw dropped at once. Gotcha! Yun Yang cried out in pain and quickly covered his chin, gritting his teeth as he asked, What is going on? Sword energy swirled in the field. It was Bai Yixue fighting Dugu Cho, and it was Bai Yixue who had the upper hand, suppressing Dugu Cho. Yun Yang was dumbfounded, not knowing what to do. Ling Xiaozui pursed his lips and said with a smile, Your residence is indeed filled with experts and talented people. Yun Yang blushed as he yelled, Stop! Stop! We're on the same side, we're on the same side. Bai Yixue chortled and said, I know that we're on the same side. Since when did I show what I've learned? I was only teasing him. With a long howl, he grew more spirited as he said leisurely, Everything ends here. He exhaled and the sword light scattered out like a waterfall. Compared to before, its strength had increased by several times and it was extremely majestic. Dugu Cho guffawed and stood still, sending a slap over. Bai Yixue cried out involuntarily, Don't block it blindly, I won't really hurt you. *T. Ugh. F***ck. The attack just now was Bai Yixue's full effort, the power of which was at his limit. Of course, it was intimidating, but it was precisely because it was a flashy move that there was no reserve of energy, making it difficult to control as he wished. Based on Bai Yixue's prediction of Dugu Cho, he should not have been able to react to the attack. While the attack was intimidating, it would only brush past him, unable to hurt him. Now, however, Dugu Cho had reacted and countered the attack with a wave of his hand, which meant that he was going to take Bai Yixue's strongest attack head-on. How could Bai Yixue not be worried? Just as Bai Yixue was panicking, the other party's slap came with a force that was as terrifying as a tsunami. Not only did it devour his sword light, it drowned him entirely. Bang! Bai Yixue was flung away like a rubber ball. Bai Yixue was stupefied at the moment. Chapter 608. At this moment, Bai Yixue was dumbfounded. I was just a little wolf cub. I thought I was playing with a little sheep, but I didn't expect that the little sheep would turn into an adult tiger in a blink of an eye. How could the wolf cub withstand the tiger's claw? Puff! Bai Yixue was flung away like a kite with a broken string, crashing into the corner of the wall and rolling a few times. When he stood up, his head was still numb. His eyes were wide open, he felt dizzy as he mumbled, I must be dreaming, having a nightmare. Yun Yang did not know whether to laugh or cry. Dugu Cho's sudden slap was unreasonable and unstoppable, sending both the man and the sword flying. I say. Senior Dugu, what is going on? What are you playing at? Yun Yang asked. No matter how intelligent Yun Yang was, he would never have thought that Dugu Cho, with his status and cultivation, would actually restrain his qi and set up a diversion to lure Bai Yixue into a fight. Such an act was no longer an unfair victory, it was a humiliation to one's status. This was something that should not have happened. What was Bai Yishue's identity? What was Dugu Chao's identity? In spite of this, something that should not have happened had happened. Yun Yang was perplexed, but he was sure that there must be a reason behind it. Dugu Chou was definitely not someone who would fool around like this. Dugu Chou had already put Big Whitey down. Regaining its freedom, Big Whitey had already leaped into Yun Yang's embrace, but it was still in a state of shock, mewling incessantly as its tiny frame trembled in Yun Yang's embrace. This time, Big Whitey was truly scared out of its wits. If Big Whitey had initially been dissatisfied and unwilling to accept the outcome, it was long gone now. Especially when it had felt Dugu Chao's sudden attack at such a close distance, the shock had scared it out of its wits. Compared to humans, as a high-tier spirit beast, Big White had a deeper understanding of the strength of the person who had captured it. Spirit beasts had always been unconditionally subservient to powerful beings that they couldn't resist. Only by doing so would they have a chance to keep their lives. This was the natural selection of the fittest, and the most basic and indisputable logic was that the victor was the king. Kid, who's your master? Dugu Chou did not answer Yun Yang directly. Instead, his gaze was trained on Bai Yishue, who was struggling to get up. My master? Bai Yishue was still dizzy. Part of it was because he had been beaten, but the other part was because he was bewildered by the incident. However, there was one thing he knew: the old man before him was a reclusive expert who was ridiculously powerful. He was on Jun Moyan's level, perhaps even more powerful than Jun Moyan. I've never seen someone this strong in my entire life, but I've even toyed with him like a monkey just now. Bai Yishue's head was buzzing. Yes, your master. My master is Xiaoqing. Bai Yishue came to his senses slowly, feeling that something was amiss. Senior, could it be that you know my master? Humph, it really is this bastard. Dugu Chou snorted, a trace of nostalgia and desolation on his face. Senior, do you know my master? Bai Yishue asked again, his tone turning even more abnormally respectful. The flamboyant, domineering, and pretentious attitude earlier was long gone. To Bai Yishue, anyone who was related to his master, even a stray dog or cat, had to be treated with respect, what more an expert like the one before him. Your master, Xiaoqing, is my last disciple. Sigh. Dugu Chou heaved a long sigh, his mood unusually low, his tone heavy with melancholy. Disciple, was such a long time ago. Then, the scene fell into a peculiar atmosphere of bewilderment once again. Your master, is my last disciple? There was so much information in this. Faced with such an explosive revelation, Yun Yang had set up a pot of tea under the pergola in the yard, chatting as they sipped on it. Bai Yishue, on the other hand, was dumbfounded. What? What did he mean? Was this old man his master's master? Was he not the Grand Master then? It looks like your master didn't tell you about me. Dugu Chou understood at once. This child obviously did not understand the current situation at all. No. I've never heard my master mention anything about his master, Bai Yishue said respectfully. At this moment, he could feel that the elder in front of him was speaking the truth. My master's sect has never been mentioned as well. I remember asking my master about it once, but I was beaten up by my master. Bai Yishue said carefully. Xiaoqing has a carefree nature and is especially narcissistic. He loves to be in the limelight and is a glutton for alcohol. He's unreliable and unreliable. Back then, I thought that he was just a young man and would be fine after some time, but looking at your swordsmanship now, especially your way of doing things, I can say that you're his disciple. You're practically carved from the same mold. There's no doubt that you're the inheritor of his legacy. Dugu Chou said impatiently, not only is he unreliable, but the disciple he taught is just as unreliable. A crooked stick will have a crooked shadow. This old man's face has been completely disgraced by the both of you. Bai Yixue was exasperated. Master's master, you're demoting him again and again. He had to admit that his narcissism and pretentiousness had indeed been inherited from his master. Recalling his master's habit of admiring himself in the mirror every morning before he went to the toilet, Bai Yixue was exasperated. Actually, I'm far worse than my master, Dugu. Why haven't I heard that you have such a strange disciple? Ling Xiaozui asked with interest in his eyes. I remember that you only had one disciple who disappeared a long time ago. Now, a last disciple has popped out of nowhere. Dugu Cho sighed and said, I had 3 disciples back then. My eldest disciple, Shengguan Jing, was my chosen successor, but he fell into a grudge with Hall of Riding Wind by chance and was ambushed by 300 experts from Hall of Riding Wind at Black Mountain. Not even his bones were left. No wonder no one knew how Hall of Riding Wind had angered you when you massacred everyone from Hall of Riding Wind back then. So this is the truth, Feng Xianga said. Back then, Dugu Cho had dominated the world, but it was rare for him to go on such a killing spree. That time, however, he had killed a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood, sparing no one. After that, he had declared in the martial world, whoever is willing to stand up for Hall of Riding Wind, just tell me your name. No matter who it is, no matter what force it is, I'll accept it. His words silenced the entire martial world. As for Hall of Riding Wind, it was a taboo in the martial world, no one dared mention it. What if I said it and Dugu Cho thought that I was an accomplice of Hall of Riding Wind and came looking for me? As a result, the matter had become an unsolved case in the martial world. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.